Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the meeting today. This is the March 25th meeting of the CalHFA Board of Directors. We have a special workshop today with several guest speakers. All of the materials are available on the CalHFA website, which is calhfa.ca.gov. And a video of the meeting and additional materials will be posted there after the meeting as well. So I will turn it over to the chair, Mr. Michael Gunning.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. Good morning, everyone, and welcome new board members. It's a great day in America, right? Why don't we start off with roll call, Melissa?
All right. Ms. Avila Farias. I'm not hearing Ms. Avila Farias. Ms. Gallagher. Ms. Gallagher, I'm not hearing you.
Okay, I'm here, sorry.
Thank you. Dr. Imbasiani. I'm not hearing Dr. Imbasiani. Mr. Gunning.
Here.
Mr. Hunter.
Here.
Ms. Johnson Hall. I'm not hearing Ms. Johnson Hall. Mr. Starr for Treasurer Ma.
Good morning, here.
Mr. Seeley for Director Velasquez. Not hearing Mr. Seeley. Ms. Von Koch-Liebert for Secretary Castro Ramirez.
Here.
Mr. Prince. I'm not hearing Mr. Prince. Mr. Russell. I'm not hearing Mr. Russell. Ms. Sotelo.
Good morning, I'm here.
Mr. White.
Good morning, here.
Ms. Campbell for Ms. Gordon. I'm not hearing Ms. Campbell. Ms. Bosler. I'm not hearing Ms. Bosler. And Mr. Kavir.
Here.
Okay. Mr. Gunning, we do have a quorum.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. And as I said, welcome to everyone. We got a few introductions to do. We have some good news. Welcome, Frederick White. Good to have you on board. First meeting. Mr. White joins the board with over 20 years of experience in commercial real estate and housing. He is currently a housing capital advisor for the City of Los Angeles' Office of City Homelessness Initiatives, where he served since 2019. Fred's responsibilities include implementing the city's $120 million Housing Challenge RFP in partnership with the LA Housing and Community Investment Department, and providing the department and the mayor's office with strategic advice on the development and of alternative loan products. He's well versed in U.S. real estate, property markets, underwriting, settling investment objectives, negotiating documents, assessing owners, fund operators, and structuring alternative funding sources for affordable housing preservation and development. So, wow, Fred, we're looking forward. We're going to put you to work. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you. Honored
Awesome.
to be here.
Glad to have you. Thank you. Also, congratulations. Anna Marie is not on, right, Melissa?
Nope, I have not heard her or seen her yet.
Okay, but we want to send the congratulations out to her. She got another 5-year appointment on the board. So happy to have her. Congratulations. Preston, I know we all know Preston's leaving Fresno. Congratulations. He took a new position as executive director of the Santa Clara County Housing Authority. So Preston, I think he'll join us later, but great news there. And then also some new news. We have a new chair of the audit committee. Delilah Sotelo has agreed to take over, and I am so excited. She's been in that role on the committee for what, 5-6 years now?
Yeah, it's been about,
yeah. So now she's in charge. So I'm happy, and obviously we all know Delilah's skill and ability and knowledge, and we're excited to have her on the audit committee. Melissa said it earlier, but I'll say it one more time. It's sort of the first meeting without Tia. And of course, we're all missing her, but we know she's gone to help America. As I said, California's loss is America's gain. I've texted her once, but I didn't get a response back, so I'm sure she's fully busy. But Don Kavir, of course, is acting executive director appointed by the governor. And of course, we'll hear from Don and also from Jennifer later in the meeting. But with that, why don't I pause and see if anyone has any comments? If not, I'll turn it over to you, Don, to kick off the ED portion.
Chair Gunning, this is
Yes.
Tina Johnson. This is Tina Johnson Hall. I wanted to acknowledge that I've joined the meeting a little late, but I've joined.
Awesome. Thank you, Tina. Good to hear from you, dear. Okay, Don, you're up, friend.
Great. Thank you, Chair Gunning. So as Chair Gunning mentioned, this being the first board meeting since Tia departed for Washington, I wanted to take a moment to publicly say goodbye to her and good luck to her. There's obviously no doubt, I think, in any of our minds that CalHFA and California is so much better off thanks to her leadership. And we're very proud here at CalHFA and excited to see all the great things she's going to do in her new job at OMB. She's obviously left some big shoes to fill, and our recruitment process to fill her vacancy is actively underway. And shortly, I will ask Jennifer LaBeouf, our Director of Administration, to provide the board with a brief overview about the recruitment process to fill the position. However, before we jump into the rest of the agenda, I have a few updates to share with the board. First, I'm happy to report that on March 5th, CalHFA received an award from the Government Finance Officers Association for fiscal year 18-19, the Popular Annual Financial Report. And this award is for financial reporting that is designed to be accessible and understandable to the general public. This comes after our fiscal year 18-19 comprehensive annual financial report was recognized this past January. And it marks the third consecutive year that the GFOA has awarded CalHFA for excellence in financial reporting for both the CAFR and the PAFR. So I want to just take a moment and thank our fiscal services, financing, and marketing teams for their hard work to ensure that our reporting meets the very high standards for transparency and accountability year after year. And the team is currently working on producing the fiscal year 19-20 versions of these reports, but are waiting on the State Controller's Office to release some final data on pension and post-retirement medical benefit liabilities, which has extended the process of closing out the audit. But I understand from our comptroller, Lori Hamahashi, that they're supposed to have this thing finalized by the end of the month. So we'll be bringing the audit forward to the board probably in the May board meeting, most likely. By way of update, our mixed income program, the multifamily programs team just closed the application period for our 2021 mixed income program on March 15th. There was $60 million of subordinate financing that CalHFA made available for this round, and we anticipated that this amount of funding would be able to help us fund approximately 13 projects for approximately 1,800 units of new affordable housing stock. The team definitely has their work cut out for them because yesterday they told me that they received 44 applications. So we're oversubscribed 3-to-1, over 3-to-1. And Kate's going to provide you with a little bit more detail on the latest round of MIP during today's business plan update. As most of you know, one of CalHFA's big initiatives for 2021 was the targeted campaign to address Black home ownership. And I'm happy to announce that our Building Black Wealth initiative had an extremely successful launch last month. Our webpage and video series, which aims to provide education and connection to resources to address the Black homeownership gap, debuted to a lot of excitement from our industry partners. In addition to the support that the NAACP that we announced last board meeting, several other organizations have reached out to partner with us on this initiative, including the California Association of Realtors, Neighborhood Housing Services of Los Angeles, National Association of Real Estate Brokers, California Black Media, just to name a few. Just in the last 5 weeks, our outreach specialists have presented on panels sponsored by CAR, as well as UCLA's Ziman Center for Real Estate, among others. And our educational video series has been viewed and shared throughout the industry. Another update related to homeownership is our industry partners have also taken note of another of CalHFA's innovative first-time homebuyer initiatives, Jamie Lane. This was the partnership with the Housing Land Trust of Sonoma County, which we presented to the board, I believe it was in September. And earlier this month, Fannie Mae actually published a white paper highlighting the initiative, or this innovative program, and they called it, I think it was titled a quote, a new approach for the rapid production of affordable homeownership opportunities using manufactured housing and infill sites. And, you know, from my perspective, it's always great to be recognized as an innovator in our space. And I will be sure to have Melissa share the Fannie Mae white paper with the board if she's not already done so. So Melissa, if that hasn't been sent out, I would ask that you do that and let the board be aware of it.
Will do.
An update on our NMS counseling and mortgage assistance. Our efforts to deploy the National Mortgage Settlement Funds, which we received earlier this fiscal year, the housing counseling portion of that initiative is up and running and working through 74 counseling agencies that are employing nearly 500 HUD certified housing counselors to serve clients across the state. We are in constant contact with the 3 HUD intermediaries who we have a contract with to oversee those agencies to ensure that everything is running smoothly. And we will receive our first official report from the intermediaries in late April. So we'll be sure to include that report so we can get some understanding of who's being served and the type of situations that they're working with. Probably in our May board meeting, we'll make sure we have a report back to you on that. In terms of marketing and outreach on this effort, we are working to reach a diverse group of the most vulnerable Californians by running advertising on television, radio, print, and digital channels in partnership with media firms that target the African American, Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Latino communities. Lastly, there's some other good news recently from the federal government. As most of you know, the passage of the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Act, which among other relief efforts will provide states with funds for mortgage assistance. As it relates to CalHFA, later in the meeting, our Director of Legislation and Policy, Frances Marti, will brief you on the details of the new legislation and the effect it will have on the design and implementation of CalHFA's National Mortgage Settlement Mortgage Assistance Program, which is part 2 of our effort to deploy the National Mortgage Assistance Funds. But given this new influx of money that will likely come our way, we're going to have to, think about the design of the program in light of federal requirements. We have a lot more to get to with our workshop and then some business items. So I'm going to conclude my remarks there. And with the chairman's permission, I would hand it over to Jennifer LaBeouf for an update on the ED recruitment process.
Thanks, Don. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Good morning, members of the board. Although CalHFA's work has continued without missing a beat following Tia's departure last month and Don's appointment as acting executive director, we have been actively seeking a permanent executive director to fill that role. Since the governor's office makes this appointment, they are taking the lead on the search. However, they have enlisted the assistance of both CalHFA and Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency, or BCSH. BCSH, through their extensive network, and CalHFA utilizing a national recruiter that we have under contract, are sourcing potential candidates to the governor's office. BCSH is reaching out to those candidates who express interest, conducting preliminary interviews, and forwarding viable candidates to the governor's office for consideration. The governor's office will then be conducting their own vetting process, including interviews, background checks, and possibly an assessment from the recruiting firm. The governor's office then plans to send finalists to CalHFA's board for your input before they make their final decision and appoint our new executive director. So any questions on the process? Okay, that's all, Chair Gunning.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. And I think it's fair to say if anyone has any ideas, let Jennifer know. I mean, we're all looking, and it's hard, big shoes to fill, but let's see if we can't all offer and be a part of this. So please share any ideas, potential candidates with Jennifer or Don.
Yes, please. Thank you.
I knew that part. You know, our March workshop has really been an opportunity during the past and present for us to really take a look at different issues, right, and kind of expand our knowledge base. We think these are a valuable method for us as members to receive updates, hear about the mid-year business results, as well as hear from experts about the industry, and really a chance to just get a different viewpoint, right? So today we're really excited. Besides my good friend Michael Novocratic, we also have Dr. Mitra with us, who's the Chief of Economic Research at the Department of Finance. And Dr. Mitra, I hope you don't mind. I wasn't going to try, but maybe you'd say your first name. She served as the Chief of Economic Research at the Department of Finance since November of 2019. The Economic Research Unit prepares economic forecasts and analyzes various economic developments in local government agencies. It provides economic information to the general public and oversees the regulatory review process. Prior to joining the Department of Finance, Dr. Mitra was director of the Institute for Applied Economics at the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation. She joined the Institute for Applied Economics as an economist in June of 2013. Before joining LAEDC, she worked as an economist for a local economic research and litigation consulting company. Dr. Mitra received her Bachelor of Arts in Economics and Political Science from University of California, Los Angeles. We won't hold that against her. Her Master's of Arts in Politics, Economics, and Business, as well as her PhD in Economics from a fine institution, because I attended it as well, Claremont Graduate University. So that erases that UCLA connection. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist, Doctor. So why don't we welcome Dr. Mitra to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gunning. So I take it you're a USC Trojan?
Football fan, and UCLA was smart enough to let me get in, so I went to CMC instead.
Oh, that's a great school. Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction and for having me this morning. So I just wanted to kind of talk about the economic outlook and the demographic outlook for California, with the caveat that right now we are in the process of working on our May revision forecast. So what we're talking about today might change in a couple of months, but you know, it's good to get grounded in what we've been seeing in the last year. And so next slide, please, Courtney. So back, it seems just so long ago, but back in January 2020, things were looking really, really good for us. We were at, 10 plus years of economic expansion. Our unemployment had fallen from the Great Recession height of 12.7% to 4.2%, which is a record low. We had about 118 months of consecutive job growth, month over month. And in fact, 1 out of every 7 new jobs in California, US jobs were created in California. And California also saw about 3.9% average GSP growth over a 5-year period. Next slide, please. And then COVID hit. And so in just a few months, we saw an unprecedented hit to our economy on a scale that had never been seen before, up since the Great Depression, actually in the 1930s. This dwarfed what happened during the Great Recession, which for many of us, we had thought that was going to be the worst recession we were going to see in our lifetimes. And so our unemployment rate went from 4.2%, which is record low, to 16.8% 16% in just in a couple of months, which was the peak of this COVID-19 recession. And the US GDP, instead of growing at 3.9%, dropped 31.5% in the second quarter on an annualized basis. And that was unprecedented. And we lost 1 in 6 jobs were lost in California just in those February to May. So, you know, I had said that we had all those 118 months of consecutive job growth and all the jobs that we had gained, and we were just hit. And 1 out of 6 jobs were actually lost just in those couple of months. And our state forecast, we went from a projected $5.6 billion surplus. At that time, back last May, we were projecting a deficit of about $54.3 billion. Next slide. So at that time, we also had some budget solutions that we could do to kind of, you know, combat this catastrophic impact on our economy. So some things we were thinking was drawing down on reserves. You know, the state was recommitting to government efficiencies. There were furloughs for salaries. There was postponing supplemental payments, and there were some trigger cuts at that time, absence of federal support. Next slide, please. So this just really quickly looks at how fast COVID hit our state. Way back when we had the first stay-at-home order back at the end of March, and then just over you know, the next year, we saw millions of cases. And in March 15th, at the time of this slide, the state had passed 3.5 million cases with a 7-day average of 3,000 cases. However, this was significantly better than at the beginning of the year when we were looking at 2 million cases, but with the 7-day average of almost 40,000 active cases. So we are, you know, vaccinations have ramped up now. You know, the weather is improving. So, you know, people are outside more, which is also a way to combat the virus a little bit. California has done a lot with public health impacts. So we are hopefully, and then the American Rescue Plan just passed. And so this is where we are now. So hopefully if I talk to you the next couple of months or this time next year, we'll actually have seen this slide go the other way back down, and we'll have almost virtually no COVID cases. That's my hope. Next slide, please. So with all this background of how great things were back last January, a little over a year ago, and with the impact of COVID, I just wanted to kind of talk really about the demographic, economic, and revenue outlook for the state, which I'm sure is not going to be a surprise to any of you that works in this sphere. Next slide. So one thing that we've really kind of wanted to talk about is the slowing population growth in California. For demographics, perhaps the most important change has been the drop in the natural increase in our population, which is births minus deaths. Births have declined about 15% during this past decade, and deaths have actually increased by 10%. This doesn't include those COVID-19 deaths that kind of skewed that analysis a little bit. So this is just natural deaths in our state. And at the same time, the share of our population that's over the age of 65 that are approaching retirement or retired and living on pensions or Social Security, that share of our state's population has grown as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And that share of the population has actually grown more rapidly than the total population. So the combined effect is a drop of about 0.5% in California's growth rate, which is much larger than any of the effects from migration. And traditionally, California has been a state that has seen international migration, particularly because of our tech sector up in the Bay Area and the Silicon Valley, but also with our world-class institutions, which UCLA is one. And so we would get a lot of migration. But in the last administration, there was some cutbacks on immigration. And then we also saw some out migration from our state to other states. So, you know, so pre-COVID, we did see some significant declines in our international migration. And the trend of out migration has led to now a net domestic outflow of about 261,000 over the last, and the largest decline in international immigration So this is now California's slowing population growth is the lowest it's been in about 100 years. So you could see that red line, and if we project this out, it would just hug that 0% rate. So we would see that even with net migration, our declining birth rate would actually have us slowing down as well. And there's a few reasons.
Doctor, this is Michael. Can I ask a question there? So we're hearing a lot of different things here. I mean, we've heard it's folks leaving from San Francisco to our region, Sacramento Valley, but are you saying net migration is folks leaving the state?
Yes. So now we have a little bit of a data lag in terms of movement data from COVID. But pre-COVID, we were seeing a lot of people leaving the state, and for the last few years, the only demographic that had actually come into the state more than left were high-income earners, graduate degrees, those earning over $100,000 a year. And so in this last year, that might have shifted the patterns a little bit as well. So that is something that we are monitoring very carefully, is our population growth rate. Next slide, please. Please forward, next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. So this is the projections that we're seeing. I had talked about it briefly on the previous slide. So our demographic research unit has kind of projected where we're going to be. And you could see that our births are relatively stable over the next through 2060. Even when we're seeing a growth in net migration a little bit as our immigration policy reverts back to where we were before, deaths are going to increase, and that's just a consequence of our aging population. And births have stayed, are relatively constant now. And part of that is because people are having children later in life, and when they're having children later in life, they're having fewer children. So that's a reason for that. So this is looking at the projections. So we can kind of say that we are going to be just about 0% or marginally, maybe a percent here or there for the next several decades. Next slide, please. So if you've seen these before, it's like those population pyramids. And these are really interesting to see, because you could kind of see where we were before and where we are projecting to be in the future. So if you look at the first one, the population pyramid, you can see that the boxes are where we were in 1980. And then in 2000, the blue are where we've expanded. So you can see that we used to have this pyramid, and now we've expanded in the middle section. And then in 2020, 20 years later, you could see how it's become more of a rectangle. And that's because our population is aging and going up instead of like declining at the top. So good news, our older adults are living longer. And so that kind of skews our population pyramid a little bit. Next slide, please. So this just looks at a county just to kind of show how things have changed. So again, the black boxes are 1980. The shading that is what happened in 2000. And you can see how it's grown in certain population cohorts. And then in 2020, you could see how it is expanded even more. And Yellow County is where you see Davis is. And so this kind of looks both on the female side and the male side, and how it skews at the bottom at the student population, the college population. Next slide. Alameda County and Northern California. Again, this actually has a really, this kind of really signifies how much that population pyramid probably now is a population rectangle. Again, to 2000 on the left side, how it was more of a traditional pyramid shape, and then in Alameda County now moving forward, you could see also at the bottom now, traditionally that the base would be bigger, we would have more children. But actually, you can see in 2020, at the bottom, it's a little bit smaller. And that's because there's fewer children in Alameda County and San Francisco, up in the Bay Area. Next slide. And Contra Costa County, the same. So it's the same. And if in Contra Costa County, you can see how significantly bigger the older population is now in the second in the graphic. So this kind of reflects basically all counties in California pretty much have this demographic shift on the aging population. So you can see the bottom section where the younger children are, that number is, that section is getting smaller, and the top part where we used to have at the top of the pyramid is now going straight up and down. And this is really reflective. I just showed a few counties, but this is just really showing you know, it's reflective more or less in every county in California. Next slide. So this slide is a little bit hard to see, but I'll walk you through it. So this looks at the labor force and working age population. And I want to point out that in 2020, we did see a significant number of people dropping out of the labor force due to COVID. When you're dropping out of the labor force, you're not looking for work. You're not unemployed either. And traditionally, over time, the labor force has grown for us, except last year it shrunk across all cohorts. So at the top of the slide, you'll see the orange, and you'll see the lighter orange shade. That's the population of adults over the age of 55 who have retired. And then the middle one is the unemployed, and the bottom one is the employed older adults. And you can see that orange, like the lighter orange shade, is actually growing up over time. That means a larger share of our population is not working. And if they're not working, and they tend to be the adults that own the businesses, and if they're not confident in the economic recovery, sometimes they choose to shut down their businesses rather than keep going and struggling. If they also retire early because they're afraid they lost their jobs because of the recession, then we're looking at a growing section of our population that is going to be at permanently lower levels of income. If they prematurely start collecting Social Security or their payment or their pensions, they're going to be at lower levels. If they shut down their businesses, that's going to have a multiplier effect on their employees as well. And so you can see over time that actually that share of those people, older adults that are not working, has grown as a percentage of our population. And towards the middle, which is the blue, which is the prime working age, you can see that level has stayed relatively stable, which means we're not growing that section of the population. And at the bottom, again, it's actually declining a little bit. And that's because over time, those who are not in the labor force, the younger student age population, and they are also declining as a share of our population. So there's going to be some profound demographic impacts in the next several decades if we don't think about these issues. So next slide, please. So this will not surprise anybody that California has had some issues with inequality even prior to the pandemic. And so, so we can see that from 2010 to 2019, aggregate household income grew by 29%. So overall, which sounds great, except when you look at the different income quintiles, you can see that the state's top 5% of earners, their income grew by more than 30%, while those who are earning less than 20% average, their income only grew by 12% in the same period. So the high income earners, they've been doing really well, and they're continuing to do really well. Those on the bottom tiers, unfortunately, they've stayed relatively low levels of higher getting a wage growth. So the recovery from the Great Recession kind of gives us some lessons about what we can expect in terms of recovery during this recession. And those, it took longer during the Great Recession to recover. Households in lower income sectors, it took them longer to recover post-Great Recession. And also households in the top 5%, just as we're seeing now in the COVID recession, they didn't suffer those reductions in income that the middle to lower income earners households did. And so so this is something that we have to keep thinking about, because our inequality seems to be getting worse over time in California. Next slide. So this is looking at actual households versus housing demand. And so we know, I'm sure you know, that we have a critical and chronic housing shortage in California, and it is exacerbating our housing affordability issues for the average Californian. The share of homeowner households in California has decreased from 58% to 55% from 58% in 2007, right before the Great Recession, to 55% in 2018. So 1 out of every 5 Californians pay more than 50% of their income in housing costs. What that means is they have less money to invest, they have less money to spend on education, on goods and services. That actually affects the rest of us in California that are supporting them. Unfortunately, the youngest Californians, the oldest Californians, and the lower income Californians face the greatest rent burden as well. If you can't afford a house, you have to rent. And if you rent, we've seen renting increase. And so as population growth diverges from housing growth, you can see the number of individuals in a household increases over time. So the blue line is the actual adult households. The red line is the implied households of, and then the dashed green line is what we had looked at back in 1980. So if we had kept up with our housing growth from 1980, we would be doing just fine. But now we are seeing that our implied households, what we're seeing now is actually more non-traditional households. There's roommates, there's multi-generational families, people are doubling up in homes just because they can't afford to live separately. And so this is showing that the lack of housing and affordable housing is going to continue to be one of our main constraints on economic recovery as we navigate the post-pandemic recession. Next slide. So one thing that surprised me and other economists as we were looking at this recession is, unlike the Great Recession, this is not a recession driven by housing, an overinflated housing market. And in fact, we were really surprised over the last several months, even as our unemployment rate was extraordinarily high and higher than it's been, housing prices continue to go up, and it get record increase after record increase. So in May 2007, right before the housing bubble burst, our home prices were just about $595,000. In December 2020, we reached almost $718,000. And so, as I said before, 1 in 5 households spends at least 50% of their income on housing costs. 1 in 8 homeowners, they are rent burdened. They end up paying 50% or more on their housing costs. And more than 1 in 4 renters spend that much. So the housing market, again, is another indicator of the existing inequality in California. Those who can afford to buy a home, they're doing great right now. They're purchasing homes, they're remodeling their homes, they're buying a second home, and it's squeezing out the rest of the California. So that's something that we're also looking at as well. Next slide, please. So this is looking at, remember the very beginning when I said that right before the COVID hit, we were looking at about 10 years of economic prosperity, largest economic expansion that we had seen in our history. And so we were adding jobs almost every month, 118 consecutive months of job growth. But we were not really adding the kinds of jobs that people would need to live comfortably in California. So this slide kind of looks at the jobs that we were adding relative to the average income in California. So you can see that the blue line in the middle is our 2019 average wage in California, which is just about $75,000. So if you're above that line, you're making more than the state average. If you're below that line, you're making less, and the size of that bubble is how many jobs were added in that sector. So the biggest job growth happened to be in health and educational services for us. And most of those jobs, in fact, almost all of those jobs, pay less than the average wage. And in fact, even worse, most of those jobs in health and educational services are in-home healthcare workers, which is a consequence of our aging population. You need in-home healthcare workers to take care of our elderly and and those with other health needs. But those jobs don't require a high school degree, and they pay about $20,000 a year. So that is concerning for us. Leisure and hospitality, California is prior to the COVID hit, we were a tourist attraction for all over the world. And so we were adding jobs in leisure and hospitality. Again, those jobs don't pay a lot. Those don't tend to be full-time jobs. They don't have benefits. And those jobs, a lot of those jobs were not, were in food service and food prep workers. And again, those jobs paid less than $20,000 a year. So this is something that we're looking at, is in the distribution of jobs have changed from the Great Recession to the economic recovery. So I don't know if prior to this COVID hit, if you ever thought, you know, we are in this economic expansion, but it doesn't feel like it. This is probably why you didn't think it felt like much of an expansion, because a lot of the jobs that we were adding just were not enough to like support people. Of course, we did see some growth, information sector, but you see how small that circle is. And those jobs pay a lot, but they don't add a lot of jobs to our economy. Professional, scientific, and business services, that bubble is relatively small as well. And so, and then if you see it to the left of that black bar, those were sectors that actually lost jobs. And so we have now in 2020, we have fewer jobs than we did before. Manufacturing, a lot of people are concerned with manufacturing. That has had a long-term sectoral decline in California and in the United States over the last few decades. You know, retail trade has also declined. A part of that is movement towards away from brick and mortar to online retail establishments. And so, so this is just something that we wanted to keep people aware of, is how the economic composition of our jobs had changed post Great Recession to right before COVID hit. Next slide, please. So as I said before, the jobs were hit. You know, we had gained a lot of the jobs post Great Recession in low wage sectors, and unfortunately, those were the ones that were also hit hardest by this pandemic as well. Those were the first jobs to go. A lot of them tended to be in-person, face-to-face types of jobs. So you can see, and this slide, this is benchmark the data. So, but the trends haven't changed. The numbers might be a little bit off, but the trends haven't changed. So right when the pandemic hit, the high wage sectors lost about 9% of their jobs. Meanwhile, the low wage sectors lost 22, 1 out of every 4 jobs in the low wage sectors. Those who could probably least afford to lose their jobs, they lost their jobs. And even now in January, almost 11 months into the recession at that time, you know, high wage jobs are just about 6% lower than what they were a year ago in February. And February is what we consider the pre-pandemic. So things were really good back then. Unfortunately, the low wage jobs are still about 14% below where they were before. Next slide, please. So this is what we think is going to be the job growth moving forward. So this is looking at 2024, where we're going to expect to see a lot of our job growth. And so, so you can see that not a lot of those circles are to the right of that black line, right? So those 0 jobs added, we're going to actually lose jobs. We're going to have some permanently lower levels of employment in several key sectors. And what do I mean by that? Leisure and hospitality, we don't expect that to ever regain the jobs, all the jobs that were lost. Are they going to regain some of their jobs? Yes. They're not going to regain all of them. And that's just a consequence of restructuring of restaurants. You might not have as many wait staff, you might have, and so retail stores are going to be permanently lose employment. A lot of those jobs are moving online. So we're going to actually see some growth in warehousing and transportation instead. And so so you can see that a lot of our jobs are going to be actually below where we were in 2020. Next slide, please. So again, widening inequality, like I mentioned with the housing prices, the stock market was also something we were looking at really carefully. Then we realized the stock market isn't really reflective of the economic health as a whole, because during the COVID pandemic, the stock market hit record highs. We were not expecting that in a recession with 1 out of 16% unemployment. So in the stock market fell 33.9% in a month from February to February 19th to March 23. This was the second largest drop in stock market history from when it fell 56% during the Great Recession, but it fell 56% from October 2007 to March 2009. So that's how long it took for it to fall 56%. So in 1 month in the COVID pandemic, our stock market fell by a third. But then it recovered within 5 months. And at the previous recovery to peak during the Great Recession for the stock market took 5.5 years. So not only did we drop, but then we recovered faster than we ever had before. And so the stock market for us is increasingly not a sign of the economy as a whole. Part of this is the stock market is reliant on tech companies. Those companies have been relatively insulated from the COVID pandemic. If you're a tech worker, you can work from home. You haven't lost your job. You're probably your productivity has probably gone up for a lot of different reasons. So those, and then also if you are Netflix, Apple, Amazon, you know, people who are at home are relying on you more than they ever have before. And so those companies are you know, seeing incredible growth. And the stock market is also forward-looking. So if there's things that are happening in the economy in the future, and investors are thinking this is going to cause our economy to recover or accelerate recovery, then they start investing more as well. And so this is why the stock market isn't always reflective of what's happening in the economy. Next slide, please. So this looks at the last few recessions and how long it took us to recover. And so if you could see, the yellow chart was the recession in the 1990s. The green one is the tech recession, the dot-com bubble burst of the early 2000s. The purple is the Great Recession, which we had previously thought was going to be the worst recession we were going to see in our lifetimes. The solid blue line is the governor's budget forecast, where we were thinking it was going to take us about 5 years to recover. And then, there's two tests that we looked at. The optimistic scenario, which is increasingly looking more likely for us, is, you know, things were recovering a little bit faster, and we didn't. And then the stress test was if things had gotten worse for us, if we had another spike in COVID cases, if vaccinations were not working, and so that's where that's the stress test. So we're looking probably at about 5 years recovery at this point. So a little bit faster than the Great Recession. So again, we had fallen worse than the Great Recession, and we are going to recover a little bit faster than the Great Recession. Next slide, please. Is that the next slide, or I'm sorry, can you? Yes, so here we are with the, so are we looking at the GDP for the US and for California? So you could see since 2015, the quarterly GDP. So the red line is the United States and the blue line is California. So during the recessions, the California gets hit worse, but it also recovers a little bit faster than the rest of the state. So you could see where we are now at the end of, we don't have the fourth quarter California data for GDP. So, but we'll include that in the next, when we have that data available. So this looks at, so in comparison to the Great Recession, during the Great Recession, the US real GDP fell by 4% over 7 quarters from its peak in the fourth quarter of 2007 to its trough in the second quarter of 2009. And in the third quarter of 2020, real GDP grew after it fallen by 31.4%, which is the greatest drop in GDP in history. It grew at 33.4%, which is also the fastest it's ever grown in a quarter. And so real GDP grew by about, so in California, we're now looking at about 2019 first quarter GDP levels. So right now we are looking at where we were about 2 years ago. And the US GDP is for 2020 has declined by 3.5%, the largest decline since World War II. So this puts 2020 US GDP between 2017 and 2018 levels. So we have, if we recovered, we have actually gone back to where we were 3 years ago. And this is the first annual decline in GDP since the Great Recession. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is looking at, so what does this all mean for state revenues? Sorry, previous slide. It's fine, Courtney, again, thank you. So, I work for the finance. What does this mean for our state's budget? What does this mean for our state revenues? Ultimately, the increasing inequality, the job losses concentrated in lower income sectors hasn't really impacted our state revenues. Our personal tax system is pretty progressive. High income earners pay a greater share, and personal income tax has become a larger share of revenues, and it's remained above 60% since 2015-16. And so while the pandemic recession has really impacted low income earners, the high income earners have stayed relatively insulated, and they've continued to pay the tax system. And so our state's revenues have stayed in relatively good health, despite the public health crisis from COVID and the large number of unemployed that continue to worry our recovery. Next slide. So this is a forecast of the three largest sources of revenues to the state. Personal income tax, we're expecting it to grow about 2.1% year over year. Sales and use tax is going to be about 1.3% year over year, and corporate tax is going to be 1.6%. So overall, we're expecting our revenues to grow about 1.9% year over year. And so this average growth is significantly better than what we had forecast in the 2020 Budget Act, right when the pandemic had hit. But it is far lower than the average growth rate since 2009 to 2010 of about 6.4%. Next slide.
I think that's the end of the slides.
Oh,
okay. Let me double check here. Oops.
there's just a couple, there's actually two more slides. I can talk through them. One of the things was talking about sales taxes and how it's much less. It's an increasingly smaller share of our personal income. So sales taxes have it going down hasn't really impacted our state revenues as well. And so in conclusion, things were going relatively well before the COVID hit. But inequality has just been exacerbated by the COVID-19 recession. We are seeing a path to recovery. The deployment of vaccines has been a little bit faster than we had anticipated, thankfully. But there are continuing to be some long-term risks to our outlook. That includes, of course, decreased population growth, our aging population and workforce, and a revenue system that's highly dependent on high-income earners and the consumption of taxable goods. That concludes my presentation. Thank you so much.
Awesome, Doctor. That was just fascinating. That was really, really good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from board members, please?
Mr. Gunning, before we continue, I'd like to just recognize that we have several more board members that have joined the meeting. We have Ms. Avila Farias, Ms. Johnson Hall, Mr. Seeley for Director Velasquez, and Mr. Prince. Oh, and Ms. Campbell for Ms. Gordon. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. Questions, anyone? All right, good. Well, let's move on to the next presentation from my good friend, Michael Novocratic. I remember when he started, that's when I was doing the COIN program, Michael. He's a managing partner of Novocratic, which has been in business since 1989. He specializes in affordable housing, community development, historic preservation, and renewable energy. Mr. Novocratic's focus is in real estate taxation and accounting. He's the author of numerous real estate-related tax and accounting articles and books, including the Novocratic Opportunity Zones Handbook and the New Markets Tax Credit Handbook and the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Handbook. A frequent speaker at tax incentive conferences and forums throughout the country, Mr. Novocratic is active in advocating for the inclusion of affordable housing, historic preservation, community development, and renewable energy incentives in the federal and state tax policy, and he broadcasts a weekly podcast called Tax Credit Tuesday. Oh, Michael, I may have to listen into that. He graduated from some school in Los Angeles University.
I knew that was coming, Michael.
I know you knew I was coming, Mike. With a bachelor's degree in economics, he received his MBA from Berkeley, and he's licensed in California, Oregon, Maryland, and Texas as a CPA. Michael, welcome, my friend. Good to hear from you today.
And Michael, I'm sorry, I missed the joke. Which school did you go to?
UCLA, Preston. We have two U.
Nice. I was at UCLA too, as was Lourdes. I don't know about that other unaccredited school in LA that people talk about.
Oh, it's just so wrong.
Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. I will note, though, Michael, on a personal note, my son did graduate from Claremont McKenna College, and my daughter's a first year there. So,
Oh, okay.
so they followed your lead.
There it is. Good stuff.
So thank you for the opportunity to discuss federal trends, opportunities, and challenges for affordable housing. I've said this, I didn't think I'd be saying this for over a year, but I sure wish we could be meeting in person again. So hopefully that'll be pretty soon. And I would invite questions as we sort of march through here. And what the focus of my discussion really is on the tax incentives, namely private activity bonds and low-income housing tax credits. Obviously, it has great impact on the work of CalHFA on the multifamily rental side. So I will be focused on that. And if you go to the first slide, I just wanted to first start with some national trends, and then also talk about where, from a legislative front, we might see more resources that could be coming to California through the tax code for affordable housing. And as you can see on this slide, across the country, and also witnessed in California as well, there was a huge increase in the use of private activity bonds to fund affordable housing starting in 2016. And the real increase there was more developments became financially feasible in 2016, principally due, or at least in part due, there are a lot of factors in anything that getting something to be financially feasible, but interest rates, had dropped roughly 150 basis points. The area median incomes had been rising, and with rising area median incomes, there's more rent that can be generated at the restricted rents, but still, if area median incomes are rising, then tax credit rents can be are higher, and as a consequence, you can borrow more debt, and as a consequence, projects become more financially feasible. Also, we saw a real rebounding in tax credit equity pricing. And those are three factors that really came pretty fast and shot up to the 14 billion in 2016. And it has stayed at roughly that level. Obviously, California was able to issue 4.7 billion in 2016 of private activity bonds for rental housing, in part because there was carryover from the earlier years. And we don't have the 2019 data. We're still waiting for a couple of states to get the data back, but we expect the 2019 and 2020 data to still be in that roughly 15 billion a year level throughout the country. And I think the significance of this is more and more states are facing what California is facing in terms of a excess demand for private activity bonds. If you look back, before 2016, before 2015 and earlier, there was always this notion that eventually we're going to be competitive for private activity bonds in California, and it sort of wasn't happening. And then now it's obviously, we're there now, and we only expect that to continue into the future. And that is the fact that there is such demand for private activity bonds across the country. I think there's 10 or 11 states that have clearly maxed out, and then there are a number of states that are close, and then other states are getting sort of closer. So that's helping drive the national agenda, which I'll talk about in a bit. And if you go to the next slide, what's also interesting in terms of the usage of private activity bonds, the bond volume that the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee allocates in California, and obviously CalHFA uses, the use of the bonds, you get from long-term cash credits being combined with private activity bonds, or the straight 9%. As you all know, There's a credit that goes with private activity bond finance residential rental housing, and then there's also a credit that the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee allocates separately. On the right-hand side, you see the net percentage of 9% units. Those have always been a high percentage of that housing incentive program, in large measure because the subsidy is so deep that you can afford to develop new construction. And as a consequence, that blue line is representing the portion that was used for new construction. And as you see below, there's the EC rehab or substantial rehab units generally have been sort of declining. In large measure, those EC rehab units were moving over to the private activity bond financing. As those became more feasible, more of the EC rehab were done through the private activity bond. But if you look on the left-hand side in terms of the use, and these are national numbers. If you look on the left side, you see the percentage of taxes and bond units, or private activity bond finance units, what were new construction and substantial rehab. And you'll see that new construction is that blue line in the middle. And basically, it was the inverse of how the 9% credit was used. It was principally used for acquisition rehab. That is changing. California is helping drive that change in terms of being able to use more private activity bonds for new construction, for new units, as opposed to financing existing properties. And I won't go into all the mathematical reasons why historically it was used more for EC rehab, but I will point out that California really took a leadership role in passing and enacting the state tax credit, the $500 million. And it was great that it got enacted again, and that's really driving the ability to use private activity bonds to finance new construction. Those additional state credits provide gap filling equity to be able to use private activity bonds to finance new construction. And I'll also say that there was during the budget discussions last year, there was discussion of potentially limiting the ability of taxpayers to use the state credit. And there was talk of even existing investors basically having to suspend the use of the tax credits they've already invested in. Unfortunately, that was pushed back. If that had passed, that would have made existing investors in California tax credits unhappy, to say the least, but it also would have affected the market obviously going forward, because investors would have less confidence that once they invested in the state tax credit, they would be able to retain it. So that was, it was great to see that exception did apply to the California state credit to allow the continuing use of private activity bonds to fund more new construction. So
Michael, this is Delilah. Do you have any analysis on the correlation between the drop in home dollars and CDBG dollars to localities and their ability to use those dollars to fund the gaps associated with tax-exempt bond production?
That is a great question, and we don't have any nationwide data or local data. We have definitely anecdotal examples that clearly plays a role. Good question. So I want to give that kind of breakout in terms of the use of private activity bonds nationally, and then also how the two incentives are used and how private activity bonds can be used more and more for new construction. And I do think other states have also been following sort of California's trend and looking to enact state tax credits and other gap filling to allow the layering of the financing. But as you all heard, if you go to the next slide, as you all heard, I think on the last board call, we did, in addition, get a new resource to help close those gaps. And one of the drivers of the gap before is there was this 4% credit, and the 4% credit wasn't a 4% credit. As Preston and others there know, it was like 3.07%. And we did, as you learned in the last board meeting, get enacted a 4% floor. So now the tax credit that goes with private activity bonds is 4%, not just over 3%. And that's basically a 33% increase in equity for all the developments that are financed with private activity bonds across the country, and obviously in California as well. And we sort of estimated that we do 10-year estimates. Many of you probably seen them on our website and the rest. And we estimate about $25 billion is the amount of equity if California stays at its current usage of private activity bonds. And you see that every few years it goes up another $5, and if there's a modest amount of growth in the population, sort of on average, that there'd be about 25 billion of equity raised without the 4% floor, and now it'd be 31.5. So the 10-year equity number is 6.3 billion. And I like to use those numbers because, just saying goes from 3% to 4% is just, what does that mean? It means over 10 years, roughly $600 million of additional equity to finance affordable housing in California, which is pretty powerful. And that'll allow, once again, more productivity bonds to finance new construction to the extent that that's what CIDLAC determines. Obviously they allocate, they get to decide, how much goes to new construction, how much goes to acquisition and rehab once there's a competition. I did want to note, though, that there is an issue out there in the tax world, and many of you, have already heard about it, I'm sure, and that has to do with the effective date of the 4% floor. And my view is that the better reading of the rule is that many developments that are already under construction should be eligible for the 4% floor. However, we haven't gotten guidance from the IRS yet as to whether or not more of the existing developments are eligible for the 4% floor. We have a Novocratic long consolidate tax credit working group. We've submitted a comment letter to the IRS kind of explaining why we think the rule should be interpreted in a way that allows more developments to qualify. And I just wanted to note that for California, if the IRS were to rule in that way, California would probably see $500 million to $1 billion more in tax credit equity on developments already in the pipeline. And that equity could be used for those developments in the pipeline to pay additional costs incurred because of COVID. Could be used to pay down some local soft financing or state financing in order to free up other revenue. You'd have to go through as part of the underwriting process at CIDLAC, or in terms of the financial feasibility test, see how that money gets allocated out. But that is a resource that is waiting for guidance from the IRS. And obviously, if the IRS says no, we're going to have a very narrow and restrictive interpretation, and that money won't be available. If the IRS were to have a more expansive interpretation, which I think is the more literal interpretation of what the words say, and many tax attorneys and bond attorneys agree, then there would be that additional revenue. So I just wanted to point that out, that that's an additional feature of the 4% floor that could be coming, depending upon where the IRS lands. And then on the, go ahead,
Michael,
please.
This is Tina Johnson Hall. Is there any thought that the 4% floor might be applied retroactively?
Yeah, well, and that's kind of gets into the question as to what does it mean to be retroactive? And I kind of think of properties under development. And when you say retroactive, that kind of implies, something that, all real estate takes, several years in the pipeline and all the rest, and all real estate is at some phase of development. So the question just is, how do you determine which developments are or aren't eligible? And I'm happy to have a sidebar or something if anybody wants to have something to talk through more of the details. We give, full hour webinars on how the rules work there, but it would have the ability, depending on how it's interpreted, to allow developments that have already started construction last year, issued their bonds last year with a small amount of additional bonds, to be eligible for the 4% floor. But it's all right now in the hands of the IRS, and until the IRS rules, positively, if they are to rule positively, you won't have investors obviously investing, because you don't know if you have the credits. So we really need to get guidance from the IRS. Thank you for that question. That's an excellent question. I also wanted to note, which also you were told in January, that you do have on the next slide, you'll see that there were some disaster credits, one-time disaster credits. And if you just jump to the next slide, we don't have to spend much time on the slide. Basically, California has, an additional roughly $80 million in credits. That's $80 million a year out of $1.2 billion. And that's what we estimate. We don't have the numbers yet from the IRS as to how much those additional disaster credits were, but they're, hopefully the IRS will get out soon. So California Tax Credit Allocation Committee can be managing it and knowing what the number is. So those are a couple of from last year. Let's go to the next slide. I wanted to talk briefly about the state of the equity markets. And I will just say, I don't want to go too long. once again, if you have questions, you can ask questions about the different points. I would just say there are a number of factors that have been affecting the equity market. The pandemic has not helped. We track equity pricing, and we find that equity pricing fell about 3 cents, like 93 to 90 cents sort of on average. Some have seen more drops, some not as much, roughly a 5% drop, which given it's a pandemic, it's to me, it's remarkably stable. And there's also a lot of questions on the equity market. We are going to see more credits available because of the 4% floor, because of more bond volume cap use. CRA reform, we were definitely nervous when a new Community Reinvestment Act rule that incentivized banks to invest in affordable housing came out. There was concerns that it could adversely affect the equity markets. We're now more optimistic, given the feedback we're hearing from the current administration. One thing I will note that is something that CalHFA definitely wants to be sort of monitoring, and that's any properties that have rent limitations based on area median income. You're going to see in the next numbers that come out in April, area median incomes rising, which everyone's going to say, wait, we're in a pandemic, how are area median incomes rising on average? And that's, of course, because the amounts are set on changes in area median incomes 3 years ago, inflation adjusted. So we expect to see incomes increasing in this next round, even though the real on the ground incomes aren't. And then a year from now, expect to see incomes increasing again. And then the next year after that is when the current COVID effect will flow through these area median incomes. So from an underwriting perspective, all of our syndicator developer clients and lender clients are looking at it and saying, what do we think the estimated rents are going to be, the estimated income levels in 2 years? So we can adjust to see if it looks like we have a pending reduction in income levels such that rents are going to be flat when we're doing underwriting. We have a rent and income limit estimator where we can kind of project out where we think rents are likely to be in 2 years. And these are all the rent limits, of course. But anyways, I wanted to mention that because that's something that a lot of people ask about the impact of COVID on the equity markets and just sort of the long-term tax rate in general. And there's obviously the on-the-ground impact in terms of incomes today, but it's also when you're looking at some of the underwriting, you got to take into account how it's going to look in a couple of years. So going to the next slide, and I'll be sort of quick here because I know you have a lot of other matters to cover. If you go to the one more slide over, I just wanted to talk about the real highlights from Washington, D.C. in terms of what we might see in terms of additional resources related to loan closing tax credits and private activity bonds. The Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act could be introduced today. It might not be introduced until after the current congressional recess. And there's going to be 4 probably key items. One is increasing the 9% allocation, just basically more of those credits available. Reducing the finance by test. Right now, private activity bonds have to finance 50% of land and building of a project to be eligible for the tax credits for the entire project. There's an effort to lower that to 25%. And basically what that means is California could build twice as much housing or finance twice as much housing with the current round of private activity bonds, which would really help let a lot more units qualify for private activity bond financing and tax credit. So that's a big effort. There's also an effort to increase basis boost on private activity bond transactions. And it's something that I know you're also very interested in, bond recycling. And that's whereby you could use bonds you could take tax bonds, finance them with residential rental housing, get the tax credits and the rest, but then refinance those bonds and use them for other housing resources, or by some it's not going to be part of this bill, but others have bills that would let you use that recycling for non-housing like transportation. So that, so CIDLAC doesn't have to make so many choices. They could say you can use the bonds for tax credits and then recycle them and use them for these non-housing purposes. And I would note there's also a push to increase private activity bond volume in other areas. There's also a push to allow maybe preservation transactions where you're preserving affordable housing, not even be subject to any of these bond caps. So that's some of what's happening back in Washington, D.C. And to go to the next slide, and then we can skip over this slide. This is just more data about the number of units, and I want to talk about infrastructure. So the question about these bills is great. You introduce a bill, the bill's been introduced a lot of times. Obviously, one thing that won't be in this bill is the 4% floor, because that got enacted last time, which is great. But there is every expectation that an infrastructure package at some level will make it through Congress. Is it going to be on a partisan or bipartisan basis? We'll have to wait and see. There's also a chance that no infrastructure bill happens of any note and it ends up becoming an election issue next year. But we're definitely leaning into an infrastructure bill passing either with or without bipartisan support. And if that does happen, that will be a vehicle for many of these goals to be realized. And then there's also the potential for some additional tax credit incentives for neighborhood homes investment, basically investment in single family housing through tax credits, as well as a tax credit for middle income housing that's paired after or mirroring the low income housing tax credit. So that's what I wanted to kind of run through. And I know it's a little bit fast, but I want to open it up for any questions folks have.
Thanks, Michael. Any questions from board members?
Yeah, this is Don Kabir. I was just going to ask Michael if he could expand a little bit on bond recycling. As the board knows, our team here has been working feverishly to stand up a recycling program for California, and maybe if you could speak to, the longer term benefits of that and what you know about other states that have amplified bond recycling in terms of how they approach affordable housing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the bond recycling is all about issuing bonds for a particular development, and then that development uses the bonds and then repays the bonds, pays the bonds off early. And you might think, why would anyone do that? You get you went and got the bonds and all the rest. Well, there are a lot of developments that they are borrowing private activity bonds because they need to finance more than 50% of their land and building costs. And they don't actually, want that financing. They don't want to have that level of hard debt on the property. They have other soft financing and such because they want to serve lower incomes, and it really can't support this 50% of your project costs or land and building costs. I will note, originally it was a 70% test that was lowered to 50. So they basically refund these bonds, they repay the bonds, pay them down, they get the tax credits, then pay down the bonds, and then have other soft financing sources to allow them to rent to low-income families at low-income rents. It's that amount of the bonds that then can be used for other, right now you could use it for other rental housing purposes. And many states have taken those recycled bonds and then redeployed them as long-term below market interest debt because it's tax exempt. And that becomes an additional long-term financing tool. And New York's, the state of New York, city of New York, Massachusetts, a number of states have taken this and had created their own sort of recycling programs. And that's something that's sort of there now. And then there is, as I mentioned, an effort to allow that those rental housing bonds, that recycling to go even beyond residential rental housing.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that the board sort of fully understood sort of the scope of that effort, because from our perspective, it's sort of in the fledgling stages, and we're trying to sort of structure things around what we're doing to allow us in the next 18 to 24 months to have a huge scale of reserve bond cap that we can redeploy and take pressure off of CIDLAC in any way we can do that. And so I think that's just something I wanted to get out there for the group. Thank you.
Right. I would just also note that if the 50% test does drop down to 25, then basically CIDLAC, as a general rule, would only allocate initially cap to those projects to get them to the 25% level. And some developments will want a full amount of 50% of tax exempt debt. And a program like this, where you could come in and say, well, we'll be the other part of your tax exempt debt, is really will be very much in demand.
All right. As per usual, Michael, great to hear from you. Any other questions from board members? All right. Well, thanks, Michael. Thanks, Dr. Mitra. That was just awesome. Really good. Frances.
Mr. Chair, can we make sure that we get copies of the presentations? They were really, really good.
They sure were, particularly Department of Finance, right? Those just chocked with statistics, migration, population, jobs, even those circles, right? I mean, the job sectors. That's the one I liked. Thank you. Melissa, will you make sure everyone does get a copy?
Yes, and if I'm technically capable, I'll try to drop it in the chat too. So we'll see, but I'll get it. I'll make sure everybody gets it.
That might be hard because some of us can't chat and forward it at the same time. So
I'll make sure you all get it too. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Frances, let's hear about the money that's coming.
Wonderful. So good morning, Chairman, Acting Executive Director, members of the board, and welcome to the board, Mr. White. And thank you for the panelists that preceded me. Those were some really fantastic presentations. So it's good to see all of you. The presentation is loaded. You should all be able to see it. And Mr. Novocratic gave us a really good overview of what's ahead, especially for LIHTC. And it seems every time I present before the board, there is an even larger and more significant federal update that's passed. Last time I spoke to you about the December omnibus bill, which Mr. Novocratic actually went into some of the details of the implications of that bill for LIHTC, such as the 4% minimum rate. And today I'm gonna give you an update on the recently enacted American Rescue Plan. So I'll start off with my typical map of the COVID-19 federal legislation to date. I think most of you know this map by now that I keep updating. I can share it with you so you can actually read the small print. But this is just kind of to visualize the American Rescue Plan within the larger context of COVID relief bill. This is the 6th bill. It could also be called phase 5 because there's a phase 3.5. But you know, to keep it in context, this is the second most expensive bill at 1.9 trillion. Slightly just under what the CARES Act cost. It was signed by President Biden on March 11th. And unlike many of the previous bills, it was designed to stimulate economic recovery from the COVID pandemic, right? But I think what really differentiates this bill from the ones before it is the scope and impact of its anti-poverty measures. So there was a study by Columbia saying that it would cut child poverty by almost 60%. And although that study was done when the bill was still going through Congress and the minimum wage hike was still in there, which got taken out the Senate, even with that out, I think there's a consensus that there will be a very, very large impact in poverty reduction from this legislation, and you know, everybody's saying that it's historic in that regard. So I'll go over some of the main provisions, and then I'll turn to housing, just kind of to give an overview. So there are the American Rescue Plan provides an enhanced unemployment benefits through Labor Day. It provides another round of stimulus checks. It provides a new tax credit to employers who offer paid leave. It provides $350 billion in state and local aid. It provides a significant expansion of the earned income tax credit, child tax credits, the child and dependent tax credit as well. Those are two different credits. It provides money for education, restaurants, and another round of small business help. And with that kind of overview, I'll turn to housing. So this bill provides the largest amount of housing assistance to date in a COVID bill. That's about $50 billion in housing and homelessness assistance. And the three main programs, there's some others, but the three main ones are emergency rental assistance. So there's $27 billion for emergency rental assistance, and that is to supplement the $25 billion that was already awarded in the December omnibus package. Then homeowner assistance, just shy of $10 billion, and I'll talk about that in more detail in a second because that's the most relevant one to CalHFA. And then there's $5 billion for homelessness, and supportive services that's flowing through the home program. So those are the three big ones, but there's also 5 billion for emergency housing vouchers, 5 billion for utility assistance, mainly through the low-income home energy assistance program, LIHEAP, and then there's some other smaller items that are listed in this slide. And then finally, I'm gonna give a bit of an overview of the mortgage assistance piece in more detail because it is of more relevance to CalHFA. As I said, the funding level nationally for this program, which nationally is called the Homeowner Assistance Fund, is just a tiny bit shy of 10 billion. Per the bill language, funding is awarded to states. And this is an important point. We believe that it was Congress's intent to allow states to designate HFAs. That was the Senate Banking Chair made some statements to that regard. Treasury is expected to issue guidance on this issue of designating an administering entity, a recipient entity. In its initial round of guidance, it's expected to be one of the first things that Treasury clarifies. And given its past experience, we expect CalHFA would be designated to administer California's program. So how much is coming to California? We don't know because according to the law, Treasury has to design a formula. The bill language does say that that formula has to be based on state's proportion of unemployment and distressed mortgages, but it is up to Treasury, and Treasury does have the discretion to create that formula. And then the bill also has a statutory timeline for the deployment of funds and the use of funds. States have to request in the first 45 days after enactment those funds, and U.S. Treasury has to start making awards in that same period. That comes out to about the end of April, the 45-day clock. It's marked on our calendar. And if states do not request funds, there is a reallocation mechanism after 180 days. And then funds are good for 4.5 years until September of 2025, which is also an important date to keep in mind. In terms of eligibility, this is funding for homeowners. There is a limitation on eligible mortgages that can receive assistance. The mortgage cannot be more than the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac limit at the time of origination of the mortgage. And then an important point, I think that Treasury is going to be looking very closely at in the guidance is how these funds are targeted. So the bill gives some parameters in this regard. It says that 60% of funds have to be targeted to 100% area median income, right? And then 40% of funds have to prioritize, the remaining 40% of funds have to prioritize socially disadvantaged individuals. And now, in the final language of the bill, socially disadvantaged individuals is not defined. In an earlier version of the bill, it was tethered to definition of socially disadvantaged individuals in the Small Business Act. That definition is also fairly broad, but we expect Treasury to provide more clarity, regarding how this prioritization is going to work. And then lastly, the uses of these funds are for mortgage assistance, right? It's pretty broad-based mortgage assistance in different shapes and forms for covering utilities. And then at the end of the bill language regarding uses, there is some broad language that would allow recipients and states to use these funds for homeowner housing stability services, also not defined in the bill, and Treasury probably will put some guardrails regarding that, but it is pretty, I think that language was put in by Congress to give some flexibility to states. So, I'll just kind of emphasize, I'll end by emphasizing that we're still waiting guidance from Treasury. There's a lot of gaps in kind of the parameters until that guidance comes out, and will clarify a lot of how the program will actually operate. But thank you for your time, and I'm opening up to questions.
A quick question, is the 40% in eligible uses for the socially disadvantaged residents, is that in the form of a grant?
No, that's a good question. The 40% is like how you are using the funds. You have to target them to particular populations that are that have been socially disadvantaged, right? And again, that's not defined, but I think the intent there is, for example, let's say that you're implementing a mortgage assistance program to reinstate mortgages that are past due. You would articulate 40% of those funds to target groups, populations that have been, for example, historically disadvantaged, right? Or economically disadvantaged. I think it's not that it's a separate grant program. That's our understanding.
Hey, Frances, this is Michael. Is it your expectation Treasury's coming to us, or they're devising the program now? Can you just expand on that portion?
Sure. We've had some very, very preliminary conversations with Treasury through NCSHA. They are asking for feedback from HFAs. They want a partnership. We expect to provide them some initial feedback, but they still haven't come up with guidance, right? And obviously it's at their discretion how much of that feedback they will use and take and implement in creating their guidance. But yeah, we've had just very, very preliminary conversations. They can't really, they're more in listening mode at this point, I would say, Treasury. They're not giving much away.
I would just impress upon the board that you guys remember the Keep Your Home effort and how well California did in the end in implementing that. So I think we've got a pretty decent reputation with Treasury, Frances, in terms of program implementation.
Yes, absolutely. We were the biggest and most successful hardest hit fund program. Yep.
Awesome. Any more questions from board members? Great update, Frances. Make sure folks have that first slide with all the programs and how they were how much and when they came out. I love that slide.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, I will definitely do that.
Good. Don, I think we're moving into the mid-year business plan and budget update.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chair Gunning and members of the board. For the record, Don Kabir, agency's acting executive director. Today, staff are going to provide you with a mid-year update on CalHFA's fiscal year 2021 business plan and operating budget. Your board packages contain a detailed report and copy of the business plan outlining the agency's progress on each of the action items adopted as part of the strategic plan. So I'm going to limit my remarks to the most significant elements of the business plan, including updates on our lending activity and revised projections for the remainder of the fiscal year. Once I'm done with the overview, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Sue, our Director of Homeownership, and Kate Ferguson, our Director of Multifamily Programs, to provide the board with a deeper dive into what's going on in their programs and give you a preview of some of the initiatives that we would like to pursue in the coming year. Next slide. So the first slide is a recap of the foundational goals of the agency's strategic business plan, first of which is to promote statewide affordable housing production and opportunities for home ownership while maintaining financial sustainability and independence. Second, to continue to improve operational efficiencies through the use of technology, workforce planning, and the implementation of best practices. And finally, to collaborate with other housing entities, lenders, both public and private, and stakeholders who complement CalHFA's lending objectives and policy priorities in order to deliver effective and innovative housing solutions. Next slide. The next two charts that I'm going to show you are intended to just provide a historical perspective on our single family program over the last 8 years. And as the chart reflects, the program has been very successful, achieving record-setting performance levels in the last 4 fiscal years. We attribute our success to a variety of factors, but among them is our effort to expand the menu of options for our single family lending programs, to facilitate a one-stop shop for the needs of our lender network and California's first-time homebuyers. We've refined our systems and processes internally to ensure speed of execution, and our down payment and closing cost assistance products are second to none in the first-time homebuyer space. Through the mid-year mark, the program appears to be on track to surpass the $2 billion goal set in the business plan, in spite of the effects of the global pandemic, rising home prices, and the lack of housing supply in general. The program is still in a position to post another strong year, but it won't be record-setting this time. Next slide. This next chart simply reflects what I think is a more important statistic, which is how many first-time home buyers, how many families that we've served. And in essence, what it's trying to show you here is that over the last 8 years, and more specifically, probably in the last 4 to 5, we're going to exceed 50,000 families that we put into their first homes. And so I think that's just something for the board to be extremely proud of. I know we are here internally. Next slide. For fiscal year 2021, single-family lending targeted to $2 billion in first mortgage purchases and $107 million in loans for down payment assistance and closing costs. At the mid-year, first mortgage loan securitizations were $1.4 billion, or 70% of business planning objectives, and we've revised our projections for the remainder of the fiscal year to $2.6 billion in first mortgage loan securitizations, and we anticipate about $126 million in subordinate loans based upon our current lending volumes adjusted for seasonality. Next slide. The revenue targets for single family lending are conservatively estimated, or were conservatively estimated, at $23.5 million in fee income from loan securitizations and from administrative fees for our down payment assistance loans that we fund. At the mid-year mark, fee income generated from the program was $38 million, or 161% of the fiscal year goal. And we're revising our projection for the remainder of the fiscal year to a whopping $67 million through the remainder of the year. This aggressive revision is primarily due to higher than anticipated production levels and investor payups. We're always conservative and cautious when we estimate revenues for single family because we're doing it so far in advance, and the mortgage market, changes frequently, and ancillary revenues like investor payups are highly volatile and they can disappear overnight. But we've been very fortunate this year in terms of the value that has been added by those investor payups. I'm happy to pause here if the board has any questions around that. Tim, Sue could probably add some more detail or color in terms of the types of things that impact these revenue projections. Are there any questions of the board? I see Stephen Russell has his hand up.
Okay, there we go. No, I had a question about the distribution of the mortgages. We've looked before. There was it seemed like Riverside was always a very high concentration of these loans. Do we have some analytics?
Yeah. Later in the presentation, when Tim does a deeper dive, he'll show the demographics and the distribution of our loans across the state.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions before I continue? Okay. So given what we're seeing at the mid-year mark, we feel that a significant revision in the revenue estimates is warranted, so we're reflecting it here. And so we're projecting somewhere in the neighborhood of $67 million for the fiscal year. Next slide, please. While production results are what we all care about, it's also the work that our staff does behind the scenes that make the program successful. And the single family program staff and our information technology team are constantly working to improve the program performance through technology enhancements and process improvements. That being said, there are several projects nearing completion which are designed to improve performance over the long term. Of particular interest is the optical character recognition project, which will eliminate much of the labor intensive, and the way we talk about it here, it's the stare and compare process of what we do in single family, in which we're trying to create a process that systematically validates system information transmitted by our lender network and compares it to the documents that they upload to our system. And the enhancement will automatically validate data from the uploaded documents to the system data that they had input. And then our staff will then only be required to review the exceptions, the things that spit out as a difference or a problem to investigate. And this will result in improvements to our already excellent turnaround times, and it's going to allow us to redeploy staff resources to other activities. Taken as a whole, all these items listed on the slide will further enhance the delivery and the efficacy of our program and the experience of our lender network and the first-time home buyers we serve. Next slide, please. Another key strategy is to expand multifamily lending opportunities and unit production while addressing preservation needs and providing incentives for mixed income housing. The multifamily programs team targeted slightly over $1 billion in lending activity and about $4.3 million in revenue for fiscal year 2021. At the mid-year mark, multifamily lending volume has surpassed our overall lending goal with $1.18 billion in lending activity, including $952 million in condo issuances, $18 million in permanent loan conversions, $208 million in permanent loan commitments, and we revised our projection for the remainder of the fiscal year to reach approximately $1.8 billion in lending activity. I'd like to just stop there really quickly and just say that this is going to be a record-setting year for overall lending activity for our program, and they deserve a round of applause. That team has really worked to make this happen. Also, the $952 million in conduit issuances is also building upon some really robust activity we've had in conduit over the last few years. That, as I mentioned, I think during Michael Novocratic's presentation, that it's those bonds that when they convert later, we're going to then be able to stockpile a lot of preserved bond cap that we can then redeploy as recycled bonds. So this all plays together, and in terms of expanding our reach as an organization and what we can do. So by way of background, I just wanted to also mention that for just the benefit of the board, that just as a reminder, multifamily transactions are always a multi-year effort that span anywhere between 18 months for an acquisition rehab transaction to 24 to 36 months for a new construction transaction. CalHFA acts as a conduit issuer in the initial phase of the transaction, but we don't do construction lending. So a construction lender partner participates in our transactions, and then oftentimes we're a permanent lending partner at the end of it when the construction loan converts to perm. And those commitments, those final commitments, can be 2 to 3 years out before we actually fund the perm product. So I'm just mentioning that for context purposes. Like I mentioned, this is a lot of growth in our multifamily program, and when we look back at it, we have to say that a lot of it is attributable to our successful deployment of the special funding allocations under Senate Bill 2, which we get on a continuous basis year over year, roughly $40 million, and Assembly Bill 101. And Assembly Bill 101 specifically gave CalHFA access to both state tax credits and one-time funds, which we've used primarily to support the development of mixed income new construction through our MIP program, which incentivizes projects located in high resource, high opportunity areas with a broad range of affordability from extremely low to moderate income. Next slide. Another key strategy under Goal 1 was to strengthen the agency's financial position by monetizing assets for liquidity while maximizing return on equity and investment. To this end, some notable efforts are the launch of CalHFA's bond recycling program and the deployment and commitment of recycled bonds on several recent multifamily transactions. As I mentioned, earlier in this board meeting, our recycling program is in its fledgling stages, and the intent is to expand that pie and help relieve the pressure on the bond cap that's administered by SIDLAC. So it's something that's going to take a while to ramp up, but when it does, it's going to have some really long-term benefits from California. On another front, our financing department is finalizing the details and timing of retiring the last of CalHFA's variable rate demand obligations, which is something we've been working on for many, many years. And it's the restructuring of the balance sheet and the things that we've done there that have led to multiple credit rating upgrades for CalHFA. And in the first half of this fiscal year, Moody's, who's always slow to upgrade, upgraded CalHFA's single-family bond indenture from A1 positive outlook to AA3 stable outlook. And we're hoping we're going to hear something from them again soon on our overall credit rating. And finally, I'll just mention that CalHFA is in the process of working with Citibank Community Capital to execute a third conduit securitization for $522 million, which increases liquidity for the bank and improves access to capital for development throughout California. CalHFA consummated 2 of these transactions in the prior fiscal year for about $636 million. The nature of the transaction is both scalable, replicable, and provides CalHFA with additional fee income to support our mission and does not require a state bond cap to execute. Next slide, please. Under goal 2, for improving operational efficiencies through the use of technology, workforce planning, and best practices, staff have implemented technology solutions to automate our accounts payable processes with workflow invoice approval, payment and documentation storage. They just created an entire electronic process for processing accounts payable. And obviously that's a little bit of minutia here, but we just want to share with you that we're always working to better the operations of the organization and maximize the use of technology. The agency continues to meet the highest standards of financial reporting, which I mentioned in the executive director comments. I won't go through that again, but we've got our 3rd consecutive awards for both CAFR and PAFR. We're very proud of that. We implemented phase 1 of a security initiative where we're deploying an application that will allow us to monitor security breaches 24/7 and notify staff regarding any events that occur, rather than having that be what it has been, which is more of a manual process in which we don't necessarily get notified at 2 in the morning if there's an event. And so I think this will nullify that sort of vulnerability. After many years of talking about improving the array of software used to manage our multifamily and asset management programs, I've mentioned in previous board meetings that we were working to identify a solution that we could integrate both multifamily originations and asset management into one system. We've found that, we've implemented it, and we're in phase 1, which is we're converting all of our asset management from its legacy platform to this new platform. And we're going to have phase 1 complete by the end of the fiscal year, so by June 30th. And then the goal is that the origination platform will be up and running before the end of the calendar year. So we're very excited about that, and the team is working really hard to get that done. Finally, staff successfully recruited and filled one of our key positions in the organization, the Director of Enterprise Risk Management and Compliance. And we've got several other positions now, including our Executive Director, that we're out recruiting for to fill. And so hopefully we'll have some good things to report in the coming months. Next slide, please. Under goal 3, CalHFA works closely with state partners and industry stakeholders to further affordable housing production in a variety of ways. This slide just simply gives you a list of a variety of the committees and councils that the executive director or other agency staff serve on. Of note this year has been the high level of engagement CalHFA leadership is devoted to support BCSH, CDLAC, TCAC, and the governor's office in the development of state housing priorities and to help translate those priorities into action through the scoring systems that were recently adopted at CDLAC and TCAC. The result of these efforts is a framework of collaboration and a scoring system for affordable housing that reflects the governor's housing priorities. Next slide. This last slide speaks to what I want to characterize as some very large-scale initiatives that we've been tasked with post-business plan adoption. And in some cases, these initiatives were, outside of our control, like the operational changes needed to address the COVID pandemic, including the redeployment of 5% of our workforce for contact tracing. Others are efforts born from our team's diverse experience and expertise in housing finance. And still others are efforts that are consistent with our desire to affirmatively further fair housing and to promote racial equity in all the work that we do here. Any one of these items is no small effort to implement, especially now the mortgage assistance deployment for NMS and more recently what we think is coming to us from the American Rescue Act. While our team has experience in this space and the board knows that the Keep Your Home California program has been very successful, it's also been fully dismantled, and 99% of the staffing, resources, and systems infrastructure used for that program are now gone. I think we closed out just after the pandemic started, and we had already, decoupled all of the infrastructure and everything months and months previous to that. And so while we can leverage off the experience we have, this effort is more accurately described as a full-scale rebuild of the infrastructure and staffing solutions that we're going to need to deploy these funds. And to do this is going to be a major strain on CalHFA operations going forward and will require a significant amount of attention over the foreseeable future. I'm telling you all this because CalHFA runs a lean and efficient operation. We have a great infrastructure to do what we're statutorily designed to do, which is to successfully and self-sustaining produce a single family and a multifamily lending platform. But what we actually lack is excess capacity to deal with what I'm going to characterize as one-off initiatives that are limited in scope and duration. Make no mistake, we're committed to delivering on all of the initiatives that we've agreed to, but I just wanted the board to be cognizant of our organizational capacity as we contemplate new initiatives for the coming business plan cycle. And as more people approach new board members and others here at the agency about other things that they think CalHFA could be doing. My comment's not meant to inhibit the conversation. That's what this workshop's for. And we want to hear from the board about new ideas and initiatives that we should be looking at. I just ask that the board consider both the capacity and the purpose of CalHFA as we were designed as you evaluate these new ideas. So next slide. That concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions before I turn it over to my colleagues. Okay. Seeing no questions, I'm going to jump into, actually, I'm sorry, I forgot, I got to cover the operating budget. It's all good though. At the same time you guys approved the strategic plan, you got also approve an operating budget, which enables the agency to pursue the goals outlined in that plan. And the approved operating budget represents both the resources and expenditure plan for the year. Our current resource budget was $70 million and our expenditure budget was $39.7 million. Next slide. Thank you. No, you can go back one. Resources are significantly higher than originally anticipated, primarily due to the increase in fee income from our single family loan production that I spoke about earlier, and also from a strong performance on the part of our multifamily programs as well. The operating budget is trending about 2.6 million or 13% under budget at the mid-year mark, primarily due to salary savings from vacancies and the state's temporary salary reductions that were imposed in the fiscal year 2021 budget. Savings on training and travel and reductions in the use of consulting have also contributed to the savings. Overall, I mean, the bottom line is that the agency is projected to spend about 36 million through the remainder of the fiscal year, which is well within the approved operating budget. So that concludes my remarks on the budget. Any questions on the budget? All right, hearing none, I'm going to turn it over to Homeownership Director Kim Sue to talk more about single family.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Let me just see if I can share my presentation. Oh, no. Where did it go? Sorry. I may need help. The menu bar went away.
They don't control the PowerPoint for you, Tim.
Okay. No, I got it now. Someone gave me control.
Oh, okay.
Are you able to see my screen now?
Yep.
Oh, you can? Okay.
Nice screensaver.
Tim, you're on agenda item 11, and we're still on 7.
I know. I
Okay.
brought the wrong presentation. Sorry. This is the one. Sorry. Okay. So I'm going to look at, let's see. I'm going to hide these. Hide webcams. Okay. I'm going to talk about homeownership through a different lens. Don went through sort of the revenue side of what we do in homeownership. I'd like to talk a little bit more about what we do from the more people and sort of impact side of what we do in homeownership. So instead of talking about sort of revenue, I'm going to talk about the value of our homeownership program. Why do we do it? Who do we serve? Where are our customers? That question comes up a lot. And why do they come to us? We must have a value add for us to be to have a presence that we have in the marketplace. And I like to also end with a little bit of high-level recap of some of our fiscal 2021 initiatives, and also offer a preview of some of our ideas for next year, a pipeline of ideas for next fiscal year, 21-22. So first, I'd like to set the stage on the numbers that you're going to see for the rest of the presentation. A lot of times we focus on fiscal year numbers, and for this particular presentation that I make in March, I present numbers for the calendar year, because by this time of the year, I have the entire number for the previous fiscal year. So what I'm going to talk about in this presentation are numbers that we achieved in the calendar year of 2020, from January 2020 to December 2020 to be precise. So in 2020, we helped 9,371 families achieve the dream of homeownership. This amounted to about $3 billion of first lien mortgage lending. This is about a third off from our all-time record year in 2019. About 80% of the production were in FHA, and about 20% were in conventional. We were definitely impacted by COVID. And also for a good stretch of 2020, the restriction of the credit box in 2020 impacted our production. So why homeownership? There's always a lot of talk about workforce housing when it comes to multifamily, but homeownership is very much workforce housing. About 11% of our borrowers make less than $50,000, and about 73% of our borrowers make less than $100,000. And we also compare ourselves to the statewide median income. So the statewide median income in 2019 was about $90,000, $91,000, and about 63% of our borrowers make less than $91,000. And when we gross up the $91,000 to 150% of the statewide median income, about 95% of our borrowers make less than 150% of our statewide median income in 2019. As Michael was saying earlier, a lot of these numbers are lagged because the time it takes for some of these stats to come out. So 2019 is the best we have right now. And who are our borrowers? This is a slide that I shown before, that we're extremely proud of what we achieved in the homeownership space. Our borrowers truly reflect California's diversity. About 53% of our borrowers are Hispanics, and about 8% of our borrowers are African American. So about 6 out of 10 of our borrowers are Black or brown. As the board knows, our single family program is a first time home buyer program. And in terms of our higher disproportionate outperformance with respect to these two groups. It's in part because Hispanics and African Americans are catching up in terms of home ownership. You can see that for Hispanics, for example, while we achieve 53%, when compared to the state representation, we outperform by about 14%, and for African Americans, we outperform by about a little bit more than 2%. Again, these are compared to the 2019 census estimates, which is the latest of what we have. The 2020 should be out soon, got caught up in a little bit of controversy. So where are borrowers? As you might suspect, because we are a first-time home buyer program, we tend not to have a lot of production in the higher cost areas of the state. The top 5 counties of our production does amount to about half of our production. So San Bernardino comes in as #1 with Riverside, and Sacramento and Kern and LA. Those 5 counties represent about half of our production. So why CalHFA? The first thing I would say is that we are a huge advocate and proponent of sustainable homeownership. As some of the older board members know, we truly learned from our single family issues from the last financial crisis, and we advocate sustainable homeownership in different ways. We have certain mandatory programmatic overlays that as taken together creates a framework for sustainable homeownership. So for example, we do require home buyer education and counseling, and we do require at the closing table a home warranty protection plan. And we do have overlays for prudent underwriting, DTI, debt to income ratio of no greater than 45%, and minimum FICO score is 660. And last year we also added an option for our customers that if they choose to have a post-closing and post-move-in counseling and also education, CalHFA has given them sort of free vouchers so that they can do that if they choose to. So we're, all taken together is a framework for promoting sustainable homeownership. And why do the customers come to us? There's certainly the value add that we must present. Otherwise, we wouldn't make a difference in the marketplace. We definitely present some unique benefits to our borrowers. For example, we can offer a higher combined loan to value ratio, CLTV, to the borrowers than, let's say, a traditional lender. And there's no LLPA or loan level pricing adjustments for conventionally insured loans. And last but not least, very importantly, and this is perhaps the thing that makes our program really shine, is that we do have a state-funded down payment assistance program that allows homeowners who do not have a lot of saving, but as you can see, have decent credit to achieve their dream of homeownership. As I mentioned, I'm just going to give a little bit of a recap of some of our current fiscal year 2021 initiatives. I'm not going to go through all these. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. This year, we executed our very first sale of subordinate loans to a private bank, to Banner Bank. We have never done this before, and we think that this is a great model for us to be able to create a new source for DPA going forward. And earlier this month, we also implemented the FHA 203H disaster recovery loan program. The board might recall that about 2 or 3 years ago, we had come to the board to ask for an exception to the first-time home buyer requirement for the disaster victims. And with the implementation of this 203H, we're going to refocus our disaster program on 203H. So that the non-first-time home buyer sort of waiver, if you will be given to the FHA 203H program. And also we're in the middle of also making it so that if you were to use the 203H, there's also a no cap on the DPA that's provided on that program. And this is a preview of some of our pipeline ideas for next fiscal year for 21-22. Again, I won't go through all these, but I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. It was talked about earlier that we we expect to receive more federal dollars for mortgage assistance. So implementation of a mortgage assistance program with the federal dollars and also with the national mortgage settlement state dollars is something that we expect to do probably in that Q1 of the next fiscal year. And we're also, I think that Don mentioned this, we're also in the middle of designing a new ADU program. We think that we're thinking about this a little bit differently than the last one we did. We're thinking a little bit more statewide program, and also a program that we think can make a real difference in terms of construction lending in that space. Those are my comments. I'm happy to take any questions, if any.
This is Helen Campbell with OPR. I'm an alternate for Kate Gordon. I did have a question about the ADU program. Do you know how large or how sizable that program might be? And a second question I had, I remember I think sometime last year when the pandemic had hit, you had given a report to the board that said that one of the approaches might be to change a strategy for lending to riskier first-time homeowners in order to help CalHFA help more homeowners. I'm wondering if that approach was ever taken over the course of the year.
Can you still see my presentation? I'm sorry, this little sidebar thing kind of disappeared on me, so I'm not exactly sure. Can you see me okay?
It's still up.
I can see you.
Okay. The ADU, I'll take them in the sequence of your question. The ADU program that we have set up right now is $19 million. So it will serve roughly in the range of 1,000 to 1,500 loans, or let's say builds, if you will. In terms of making loans to riskier borrowers, if that was said, it probably didn't come from me. But I would say this, and to be sure, it's not so much that we don't. I mean, most of our lending is done right around 45% DTI, and most of our lending is done very close to 100% CLTV, sometimes above 100% CLTV. As I mentioned, that's one of the reasons why people come to us. So the lendings we do, it's not by any stretch of the imagination like prime lending that banks would love to do. It's definitely riskier loans, but a comment like that, it doesn't feel like me, but perhaps it came from someone else.
Tim, can you talk about whether, or to what extent you're seeing any forbearance, and kind of how's that trending in terms of requests for forbearance or economic stress?
Yes. So we monitor the forbearance activities on these loans, although, as I think the board knows, we don't own these loans. These loans are all packaged into MBSs and sold into the mortgage market. We do monitor it, and it does seem like the activities are moderating sort of month over month. And the one significant thing to note is that, and I hope board members hear about this as well, that a significant portion of people who request for forbearance are actually current on their loans. So then, so for us, that percentage hovers around like 30 some odd percent. In other words, if we have 100 people who are on forbearance plans, something like 30 odd people actually continue to pay and continue to be current. So so sometimes when I look at some of those forbearance numbers, they're not always telling the full story, but it does seem like the trend is moderating. And as I think the board might know, that the forbearance deadline, if you will, or expiration day has now been extended to the end of June 30th. So it's a story that we'll continue to monitor. If no other questions, I'll turn it over to Kate Ferguson.
I think
Kate.
Steve has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Always good to hear your presentations. I guess I want to go back to the geography because you named the top 5 counties. Could we get information on the others? And I guess the second part of that, because I know that San Diego is a high cost area, but I guess the other question is how do we market? Is that our local partners? We have local partners that do the marketing and outreach, because I feel like there's probably missed opportunities in Southern California, and I'd just like to see if there's ways that we can mitigate those costs.
We do actually do okay down in San Diego, but as you know down there, it's very expensive and very competitive. So most of the production we do down in San Diego are condos. But I'll be happy to send. I can coordinate with Melissa. We'll be happy to send to the board a complete breakout of our production in 2020 by county. That's something we can very easily do. And now on your question about outreach, sorry. On your question about outreach, we are not a direct lender in the single family space, unlike on the multifamily space, we're actually a direct lender. So how we do outreach is through the lender base that we have. So we have about 130 approved lenders, and we have, possibly like thousands of loan officers who know about our loan program. So reaching them so that it can reach their customer base is sort of how our program works. But every single community outreach program that we know about or we're invited to in terms of homeownership, we attend. So I just got, I'm blanking, but I just got a request yesterday from a mayor asking if we would attend their homeownership workshop they were going to do virtually, and we agreed to every single one of them. We sent someone to talk about our program, what we can offer, much like I said earlier before, in terms of higher CLTV, down payment assistance, no LLPA, and sort of the whole package of what we present. We attend every single one that we get invited to.
Yeah, I'd like to, if I can create any more opportunities down here for those presentations, I'd be happy to. I just, what we're seeing in this economy right now is we're seeing a bifurcation where there's folks who are below a certain wage level who are hourly, who are just being hammered by the pandemic. But folks above a certain level are actually being able to sock away some cash if they're keeping stable employment. Folks in rents, there's kind of a lid on rents right now economically. So I just want to make sure that we capture opportunities. If there's anything I can do locally to connect local providers with with more information, I'd like to see that we can do more if we can. I should say that I would do more if I can. I'm not putting the onus on you guys.
In single family,
I'm not hearing you.
we have I feel like we're part of the solution, but to your point, we're not the solution. But anytime that there is an ability to do a community outreach in terms of homeownership, we participate in all those events, and we have a specialized group inside single family. That's basically their full-time job. They go out and train loan officers. They train lenders. We approve them. Every year, our approved lenders get recertified, and part of the recertification is that they know our program for sure, but they also know how the program works in terms of process. We do have staff in single family that are doing compliance work, meaning that they submit a package, and then we say, okay, you approved to close, and if everything's okay, then we'll give you the down payment assistance after closing. So there's there are a lot of teams that are working sort of on a process, but there's a dedicated team working on outreach, and anytime we have an opportunity for outreach, we take it.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So if no other questions, I'm going to see control of my screen. And I'm going to turn it over to Kate, who is our Director of Multifamily.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Just for the record, Kate Ferguson, Director of Multifamily Programs, and I want to give you a brief update today. I won't take too long. Just to talk about the activities of multifamily in the first half of the fiscal year and what we expect through the end of the year. First, next slide, please. Sorry, Courtney. First, as a precursor to presenting our lending volume and year-end goals and projections, I first want to refresh the board's knowledge around the staging and timing of the funding cycle for affordable multifamily projects. Don touched on this a little bit, but we'll go through it again, and then I'll walk through our successes in our multifamily programs, which drive lending volume, and our year-end projections. Finally, we'll review the progress we're making in some of our strategic initiatives, including some of the opportunities and challenges that we see when we look ahead. Next slide. So this is a slide that many of you have seen in some form or another. I'm presenting it today because it's important to understand the timing of CalHFA's involvement in the context of the entirety of the development process. I've highlighted the 2 points in the process, the 2 orangey yellow boxes, where CalHFA is actively involved. So the first is the top right box, which follows 3 to 4 years of pre-development. It can be 2 to 3 years, it can be 3 to 4 years, but that's all of the pre-development work that goes into a deal before the developer is ready to find their funding commitments. Generally, there's a 12 to 18 month time frame in which a developer finalizes their development plan, applies for construction and permanent funding sources, and finalizes investor negotiations in the project ownership structure. At this time, CalHFA may enter the deal by providing commitments for conduit issuance and for permanent financing, either combined or standing alone. The CalHFA financing commitments will remain in place throughout the 3 to 4 year construction lease up and permanent loan conversion period. So this shows it really is 3 to 4 years from the time we provide a loan commitment, and this is for commitments. Conduit, we would go in obviously at the close of the construction loan, but 3 to 4 years from the time CalHFA provides a loan commitment to the time that commitment will actually disperse funds on it. So while the trajectory of the development timeline is somewhat predictable based on historic trends, there can be disruptors making the timing very hard to predict. One such disruptor in 2020 was COVID, which delayed a bunch of different deals. Next slide, please. So now that you have the context and the timing of a loan commitment versus the subsequent funding of that same loan, let's look at our lending activities so far this year and our revised projections for the remainder of the fiscal year. So to be very clear, when you look at this chart, which reflects the production year to date as of 12/31/20, you'll note that I put a C or an F next to each line item, indicating whether the production reflects new commitments issued at construction loan closing or funding of previous commitments, which happens at the time of the construction loan is paid off and the project converts to its permanent sources of funds. As Don mentioned, we started the year with a target of $1.05 billion in lending activity, and we surpassed that target by the end of the 6th month of the fiscal year with over $1.18 billion in actual production. This slide provides a more granular breakdown of some of the information that Don presented. You can see that our production growth was driven by the conduit program, which was at 133% of the 12-month goal at the end of the first 6 months. Additionally, our MIP program, which was at 151% of the 12-month goal as of 12/31/2020, was also a large factor. The success of the conduit program results from 2 very strategic decisions, which increased our competitive advantage. The first was to modify our pricing metrics, which made our conduit product extremely competitive while still providing CalHFA with a solid return. Thanks to Tim and his finance team for working with multifamily to get that done. It had a huge impact on our production. The second decision was to require CalHFA to be the issuer for any deal in which we were providing either MIP or related permanent financing. Our MIP subsidy loan volume also exceeded expectations as a success of launching our over-the-counter program in early 2020. As you remember, that was fiscal year 1920, translated to construction loan closings and firm commitments for CalHFA MIP in the second half of 2020, which rolled into fiscal year 2021. Revised estimates for the fiscal year are based solely on our established pipeline as of the end of February 2021. They include the continued construction closing on the remainder of the 2020 MIP loans and related conduit and permanent commitments. Next slide, please. Now, and perhaps most importantly, let's talk production in terms of units produced. As we've discussed before, we count new unit production at the time CalHFA's firm commitment is signed as part of the construction loan closing for individual deals. In the first 6 months of this fiscal year, our production related to a total of 3,625 new units. And based on projections for the end of the fiscal year, we expect additional commitments and closings will account for a total production of 6,171 units. This is the direct result of the success of both the MIP and the conduit programs as previously discussed. And for the board's information, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the outcomes of our 2020 MIP program. We did a total of 3,749 units with an average AMI of 60%. 37% of the total units were at AMIs of 30 to 50%. 61% of total units are at 51 or 51.8% are at 50 to 80%. And only 1% of our total MIP units were above 80%, from 80 to 120% of AMI. So our average was at 60. We had a good spread from 30 to 50 and a very strong spread from 51 to 80. We had very few units that came in over 80% AMI. We expect our numbers to continue to grow with the official introduction of our new bond recycling program, which we just posted the term sheet for that on Tuesday. So please go to the CalHFA website if you'd like to see that official term sheet is up. And our 2021 MIP program, which closed applications on March 15th, as Don mentioned. 44 applications were received in total, and staff are currently completing the application review for minimum program requirements and thresholds. We expect to be able to fund approximately 13 of the 44 applications, which we estimate to be 1,800 to 2,000 units for our next fiscal year. As I reported to you at our January meeting, we've aligned our ranking of the applications with TCAC's tiebreaker methodology, which uses the statewide basis delta, which represents the locality cost adjustments throughout the state. This methodology was adopted with the new CIDLAC regs in late December, and rolled out with the first round of applications in January. We will be submitting the top ranking MIP applications to CIDLAC in the second round, which has a submission deadline in May. Next slide, please. I think you went backwards instead of forwards. Yeah. There we go. Continued priorities for the multifamily group in the next, through the year end and going into the next fiscal year. We'll continue to focus on furthering the top 3 goals of the agency as approved in our 2021 business plan. Production, our focus will remain on the deployment of our programs by bringing shovel-ready projects to construction as soon as possible and as efficiently as possible. This is a priority that carries through to every program in multifamily and is always top of mind as we look at, we're very anxious not to be a bottleneck in any way or to delay projects in any way because of our programs. Operational efficiencies continue to progress. Our new multifamily system will allow both the multifamily lending and the asset management team to utilize an integrated system for the first time. And an ongoing database and loan management tool that talks from loan origination all the way through to asset management. We'll continue our collaboration efforts related to affirmatively furthering fair housing, development of our revised 2021 MIP and our new bond recycling program and the wind down of the SNP are all ongoing collaborative efforts that involve a variety of partners from the STO's teams at CDLAC and TCAC to our partners at HCD and our stakeholders in the community. A look ahead, next slide, Courtney. Nope, other way. There we go. We're very focused on growing the recycled bond program. We see that as a huge opportunity for the state as a new resource in tax exempt debt. We're getting many inquiries on that. We've worked hard to make sure that it's incented. We worked hard with the administration and with CDLAC and TCAC to make sure it's incented in the current CDLAC regs, but also we're seeing a lot of interest from preservation and AC rehab developers who have very little access to the CDLAC bond cap. So we're very excited about that program and we'll continue to look at growing that. Our improved systems and staff and support, everything with the improved systems, it seems like everything gets easier. I hate to say that out loud, but having a system that talks from one end of the deal to the other will be a huge efficiency for our team. And we will, I think our increase in unit production by focusing on readiness and efficiencies in production, that will continue. And I expect next year to be maybe not as big as this year because our conduit program will have already been rolled out in existence, but I expect great success in unit production through the end of the year and through next year. Our main challenges that are always front of mind are maintaining a balanced view of the priority of production of new units within a band of affordability from 30 to 80% AMI to avoid production delays and funding bottlenecks. Addressing the high cost of development and the cost components at the local, regional, and state level continue to be something that we're all focused on, trying to find ways to lower costs related to issuance, entitlements, impact fees, any barriers to development, et cetera, and trying to have a voice in that conversation. So with that, I will end my presentation and take any questions.
Kate, I have a question. This is Eileen Gallagher. We had a presentation last year, I think, on a project in San Francisco that was trying to streamline local approvals, and it was a little bit innovative in that regard. I think that has moved quickly, but I believe there may be some pushback on it. I'm curious, as you know, one of the challenges for our program and for production generally is local rule, local fees. And I know that that was something that Tia had brought to our attention frequently. Any updates, interests, changes on that front that you can share with us?
I would say it's something that we continue to advocate for. I think you're talking about the deal that it wasn't one of our deals, but it was a modular deal that was done in San Francisco that they moved very quickly with. Is that the deal you're referring to?
Yeah, I think it was a TNDC project perhaps, or I don't remember.
Oh, the TNDC project, we did end up closing, we're working on closing that. It was just approved in the January board meeting. And yes, I think TNDC had a huge partnership with the city in that, and it did result, and I think all developers and all localities we've always been focused on making sure that the localities are fully engaged in the developments before they go forward in an effort to make sure that there's efficiency in the review process, et cetera. I would say that that partnership, even with the slowdowns at all approval levels throughout, you know, the localities, the state, with the exception of ours, of course, I would say that that was really able to move forward at a very expedited pace because of that partnership. And I see developers really focused on that as a priority now. It's a given that you have to have that local buy-in and the local, and sometimes that's a barrier, but more often we're seeing it be an efficiency factor in moving deals to production. Anything else? Okay.
If I may.
I just wanted to say that, Kate, can you hear me?
Yes.
That I'm so impressed with, you know, how the program has evolved and, you know, this that you've, and in the marketplace, you know, our reputation, I guess is the best way to say it, has been strengthened so significantly by the work that you're doing. So I just want to congratulate you and your team for a job well done, and, you know, continuing to you know, to just, you know, keep production high.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
If I may second that.
Oh.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, no, I want to second the remarks. Your team has done an amazing job and in a challenging environment. So thank you for that. I do want to ask a couple of questions. One is with regards to local issues. I know that there are some municipalities who have balked at allowing CalHFA to be the issuer and have tried to assert local control in that regard. I'm wondering whether that is a constraining factor in markets outside of San Diego, or even if you see it as constraining in the city of San Diego.
I would not say it's a constraining factor. I would say it's something that we're talking to local issuers about all the time. And I would also give, I don't know, kudos is the wrong word, but I would give the localities praise. Their priority is to get deals done and to get them done efficiently and to get them out of the ground if they're ready. So while I think we're going to continue to focus on that, we're going to continue to focus on fees associated with every part of the pre-development process and doing what we can to be a voice in the conversation to make those fees, to lower the fees and build efficiencies in the entire process. We'll do that. But I think what you're seeing in California right now is a huge support at the state and the local level, at least in most of the deals, I would say in the majority of deals that we're seeing.
Okay. Yeah, and locally, I think the issue is whether or not we are seeing the most efficient costs of issuance when the local agency is doing it versus CalHFA, and so there is some dynamic tension here, and how that resolves have lessons for part of the state. So I'm interested in.
There is, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add something if I could, which is that I think Kate and her team, as well as Francesc, have done a lot of work with the major issuers, the major localities, which are really San Diego, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, and you know, there's some others too, but we've had some really good conversations, and at least 2 out of the 3 have been really receptive to sort of discussing partnership going forward. So we're encouraged by that, but I think you're correct. There is a natural tension. Our product is pretty competitive in comparison to some localities and the way they approach issuance, but we're trying to find a way to bridge that divide. So.
And it's, I would also, yeah, I would add to that it's not just about the cost of issuance, it's about the infrastructure that supports the issuance. And so it is a complex conversation. And our reduction in our pricing sort of brought it to a head. So that's all good as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I appreciate it. I just want to make sure that we don't have barriers. I mean, it's the MIP program is extraordinary, and I would hate to think that the largest municipality down here is maybe not able to fully avail itself of that. So I appreciate your attention to that. And I guess the other question I have is really about the overall goals here. I mean, you talked about it being 30 to 80% is almost all of the production under MIP. And was there, I guess I'm asking what is the philosophy? I don't want to challenge the philosophy, but asking what it is, because I had thought that the goal was in fact to see more cross subsidy by being able to produce maybe at the higher end that could make more projects financially feasible. Can you talk about the philosophy behind the range, and are we hitting a target, or are we putting it out there and letting the market tell us where this is useful?
I think a little bit of both, to tell you the truth. And I think when we set the over-the-counter program up, we were very focused on incenting units that were over 80% AMI in general. When that boiled down to specific localities, over 80% AMI doesn't work in a lot of the localities throughout the state because the market rates are so close to the 80, even 70 or 60% AMI levels. So it depended, it was a very local discussion. Also, you know, we responded, what ended up happening in 2020 was also the result of the investor market. And as we've discussed so many times before, we operate in the context of a very large and very robust industry. And the investors with COVID and with market slides were very concerned about doing anything that was over 80% AMI. And so what we found was that while the developers understood the benefits, and I think we're still getting some of those benefits because we do have you know, from 30 to 80 is still a good, and an average of 60, that's a good broad reach. But without the support of the investor community to sell those credits, we had to pivot a little bit. I would say the developers had to pivot. And so that's what we ended up seeing. And I expect that to continue in the near term. I think the investor market, while it's robust, is still a little skittish about what the economic recovery is going to look like.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Again, thank you for your work, your team's work. I think you've got some really innovative products that we're offering here. The MIP is extraordinary, and I appreciate the nimbleness of responding to the marketplace as opposed to being rigid in terms of, I mean, ultimately it's about housing production. And I hope that there's some really good lessons we've learned on an ongoing basis. I continue to be concerned whether or not local standards, you know, inhibit the use of the program, and it'd be worth knowing if it's something that exists. I would hope that that isn't reducing production, and I look forward to hearing in the future how some of this tension gets resolved. So thank you for your work, and thank you for your work. I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, Kate, it's not like the program prohibits the use of, if a developer came and they were able to have an investor come in and support the funding of a project that was at 110% of AMI. We're not prohibiting that under the program, correct?
No, yeah. Based on the market dynamics, we're not incenting it because we didn't see that as being a realistic piece of the program this year, but absolutely not. And we did have, especially before COVID hit, we had quite a few units that were above 80%. But when the investors came back and said they wouldn't consider anything over that wasn't supported by a tax credit in the project, the development community had to pivot, and we pivoted along with them. So I think we'll have to continue to be nimble as the markets change.
Yeah, and I think it's important, you know, just from a philosophical standpoint that, you know, part of the initial policy initiative was to encourage the creation of workforce housing on the missing middle part, and that we not lose sight of that opportunity or, you know, that potential. So if it takes 100%. Educating the investor community, maybe that's one of the things that we need to start doing, maybe at the third quarter of this year, bringing in investors and talking with them about the kind of the broader philosophical policy initiative.
Yes, absolutely agree.
Okay.
I also agree, but I'm just coming from an investor lens. I'm not sure if you can convince them in a pandemic environment to do something different than, or more creative or more innovative than they're accustomed to doing because of their own internal risk challenges. So just something to think of is that it may not be a point of education, it just may be a point of risk adverse leanings.
Understood. Yeah, and then maybe they need to educate us about that more specifically, and if there's anything that we can do to help mitigate that risk, or, you know, create some sort of backstop for that risk. That costs us less than, you know, than taking it on ourselves, or, you know, doing something else.
Well, agreed, and I'd be happy to interface with my friends and get them in here and so that we could create more opportunities, which is, I think, the bottom line.
Awesome. Any more questions? Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Tim. I think, Melissa, we're going to take a little break here, or everyone want a break, or we want to keep powering through?
We could take a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break. 5 minutes? 5-minute break, everyone.
5-minute break. All right. Come back in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Preston, can you hear me?
I was just writing back to you, Stephen. How are you?
Good. So,
gentlemen, it's Melissa. I just want to let you know it's open mic, so everyone can hear you both, okay?
Okay, well, I'll
give me a call on the cell phone.
Just mute your mics. Thank you.
Yes.
we see who the obedient children are.
Right. The folks that know how to
good
follow rules. Right?
Yeah,
Good.
my dad was a general in the Air Force. I was always on time. Early.
Rule.
I'm also a social worker, so I also kind of feel okay with myself when I am late.
I was just going to mention that I know a couple of you had called me or made a comment that you were muted or your camera was shut off. So we have done that on this side every now and then when we thought that there was a decent reason to do it. So if that happens again, you can just chat with any of our organizers and we'll make sure we release it. Hopefully we'll not have that. We'll try to release it earlier than whatever, but just wanted to let you know that. And if anybody's having any problems right now and they can hear me, feel free to shoot us a message in the chat and we'll get you fixed up.
You're just telling us you have all the power, right?
Ha, love it.
All right, do we have everyone back, Melissa, do you think?
We're pretty good. I also want to mention that at some point, and I apologize, I don't know when, but Dr. Vito Ambaziani from CalVet joined us, and he was sitting over in the attendee room. So he's now been promoted to a board member. So anyway, we're welcome, Dr. Vito.
Oh, good. And I think some folks I know have to leave by noon, so okay, let's get going. And if you do have to leave, just put a note in the chat. And thanks for your participation.
Okay, are we ready for the next?
Let's go.
Okay. All right, we have 2 loan approvals to present to the board today. They're both for permanent financing. The first one is Flower Park Plaza. I have on the phone Kevin Brown is the multifamily underwriting specialist who did this deal, Sheena Coe, the multifamily credit officer, and I'd like to welcome Sydney Stone, the director of real estate development, who is here on behalf of the developer, Christian Church Homes. Next slide, please. This is a refinance of an existing CalHFA loan on Flower Park Plaza, which is a senior project with 199 units, originally built in 1984. It's located at 901 West 1st Street in Santa Ana, Orange County, and the project is located within a low resource area pursuant to TCAC's Opportunity Area Map. It's in close proximity to grocery stores, public transit, and other services. Next slide, please. The project is one 11-story elevator serviced building. 198 units are restricted at or below 50% AMI, including 51 studios and 147 one-bedrooms. There is one unrestricted manager's units. All units are subsidized by HUD's project-based Section 8 program for an initial term through 2040. This refinance will extend CalHFA's existing bond regulatory agreement by 5 years from its current expiration in 2056 to 2061. Christian Church Homes, or CCH, is a nonprofit development company based in Oakland. They have developed 40 HUD finance projects providing in excess of 3,000 units, utilizing HUD's Section 8, 202, 236, home, and risk share insured loan products. Flower Park is one of 2 performing projects in CalHFA's portfolio, which are owned and managed by CCH. Christian Church Homes of Northern California is the property management arm of CCH and will continue to manage this project. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. CalHFA, oops, I'm sorry, can you go back one slide? It doesn't matter. CalHFA will replace our existing $4.6 million loan by providing a $26.7 million taxable permanent first lien loan with a 30-year maturity and a 40-year amortization. The estimated interest rate is 5%. We have used a 25 basis point spread in our underwriting as a risk mitigant. Other funding sources provided by the developer include existing reserve accounts in the amount of $4 million and surplus cash a surplus cash account in the amount of $758,000. Total sources are $31.5 million and will be used to pay off our first loan, our existing loan, do moderate rehab of approximately $20,000 per unit, and preserve the project to recapitalize operating and replacement reserve accounts in excess of $1 million. Cash out equity to the borrower will be funded in an estimated amount, sorry, I keep hearing feedback, in an estimated amount of $21 million, which will be used to improve other existing projects in CCH's portfolio and to invest in new affordable housing development initiatives and pre-development costs. Next slide. The moderate okay, you're one slide ahead of me, Courtney, sorry, and that's my fault. The moderate rehab scope of work, you can just stay here, I'll get to this slide. The moderate rehab scope of work based on the most recent physical needs assessment will consist of replacing systems improvements, plumbing, HVAC, electrical, safety, and security, and solar. There will be exterior improvements, common space finishes, and equipment and furnishing replacements as needed. Unit level and system improvements will not require tenant relocation. In case of an unforeseen issue, we do have the borrower will cover cost of any short-term tenant relocations that may come up. Okay, here we are on this slide. We've highlighted some of the project strengths here, which are also outlined in section 7 of the staff report, and include the sponsor's extensive experience in preservation and management of similar affordable housing projects, including experience with CalHFA. The GC has experience in rehab of similar affordable housing developments, and they have extensive experience using HUD's Section 8 program. Based on the exit analysis, which assumes a 2% increase in the cap rate and a 3% increase in the underwriting interest rate, repayment risk is nominal. That concludes the general presentation of the project. I wanted to invite the developer, if he's on the line, and it's Sydney Stone, the Director of Real Estate Development, on behalf of the developer, if they have any short comments they would like to make.
Yes, this is Sydney Stone, Director of Real Estate Development for CCH. And I appreciate the board offering me a few minutes to make a few comments here and for considering this request. CCH, this is our 60th year in operation. Between the units that we own and the units that we manage, we have approximately 5,000 residents who depend on CCH for their housing. And this particular rehab is really one of many of the rehabs and refinances that we're doing right now. CCH has essentially a new team. We have Sid Najib, who is our former CFO, who is now CEO, and myself as the new Director of Real Estate Development. We are very much interested in jumpstarting our project pipeline. We recently won state Tier D funds for our Hayward project. We have vouchers for our Reading project. And these kind of refinances and rehabs are really going to help us utilize those funds in order to really accelerate the production that we'd like to do at CCH. We are also looking at a variety of programs and scouting out sites throughout the state, as well as out of state as well. And we are currently, I've got LOIs outstanding on about 4, 5, 6 different sites right now. So we really intend to put these funds to use to create new affordable housing, as well as to help rehab some of our other properties. CCH is also working with a couple different, there was some discussion earlier about how to accelerate affordable housing production and how to cut costs, and that's one of the initiatives that CCH is working on. We're actually working with a modular manufacturer that we think we could actually cut our costs by almost 2/3. So instead of having a 500,000 per unit development, we're looking at 200, 250. I'm actually looking, I heard that you're oversubscribed on the MIP. We're actually looking at that for our Sacramento development, which may be our test case for this with this modular manufacturer. And for 145 units, our TDC is coming in at 32 million. That's total development costs, hard costs, soft costs, everything. So again, this is the start of some initiatives with CCH that we hope really can bear some fruit and really make some impacts in the affordable housing industry. So thank you.
Thanks, Sydney. And that's the end of our presentation on this deal.
Questions from board members? Mr. Russell?
Thank you. A quick question about the specific conditions of approval. The first one, I just would need explained to me. The receipt of a reliance letter from SCS engineers regarding the information gap on on-site USTs. Can you unpack that for me?
Sheena, are you available?
Hi, this is Sheena Ko. Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the receipt of the reliance letter from the engineers and resolution on the formation gap regarding the on-site underground storage tank prior to perm loan conversion. During the phase 1 process, it was discovered that there was a underground storage tank, so that just needs to be addressed prior to CalHFA taking the project out at conversion. So that would be part of the rehabilitation scope.
So the removal of the tanks is, or the determination of their status?
Yes, both.
The determination.
Okay, so
no, this is Sydney. That to me is incorrect from my discussions with Kevin. That first condition was that so back in 2006 when the last time this was refinanced, there was a phase 1 at that time, and because of the information gap, we suspect that there was a gas station in the past. We don't know if the underground storage tanks were removed. That's essentially the information gap. So the solution to this in 2006 was that CCH would monitor the soil and do that on a consistent basis and monitor any environmental impacts, and also check to see if there were any new information that came to light. This was the agreement that was made in 2006. And so since we have the same condition here and no other new incidents have happened, CCH agreed to go ahead and continue monitoring and making sure that the environmental situation stays static. There was no agreement to start searching for underground tanks or to remove them, because the information gap is we don't know if there are still underground tanks there. We assume that they were removed, but there's absolutely no record that shows that they were. So the agreement in 2006 was to continue monitoring just to make sure if there's no environmental impacts with the soil and such. So I thought that that's what we had agreed to, again, just to continue that monitoring.
So I just want to make sure that there isn't an unidentified liability there, and where does that fall if there's conditions change?
So generally, Stephen, generally what we would do is we would do investigation, and any needed mitigation or remediation would be a condition of the perm loan closing. I think what Sydney is talking to is the information gap, and I think that's also what's in the agreement. So first we have to identify if we do have a problem. If we do have a problem, that will be one of the things that will have to be mitigated before perm loan closing. We don't know of anything yet, but we identify it as an issue to follow up on.
Okay. Well, given we're talking about a pretty significant amount of equity coming out of this, it seems to me that mitigates the risk We're not talking about something on a shoestring. It is our sincere hope, I think, that you're able to continue on your mission. I really appreciate the intent of taking out cash, of really releasing this equity and new production of housing. I think is a great principle, and so I appreciate its attention to this information gap issue, but I also feel like there's enough resource, but with the equity being taken out, that I would hope would mitigate the risk in terms of there's more than enough equity to cover any unforeseen circumstances. I'm happy to move the item if there's no other questions.
Is that what you're looking for, Don? Motion? Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Who was it?
Anna Marie.
Thanks, Anna Marie. There's a motion and a second. Melissa, roll call.
All right, Ms. Avila Frias. Ms. Avila Frias. We're not hearing you. If you're
Can
on
you
mute.
hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Gallagher.
Yes.
Dr. Imbasciani.
That's yes.
Mr. Gunning.
Yes.
Mr. Hunter.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson Hall.
Yes.
Mr. Starr.
Yes.
Mr. Seeley.
Yes.
Ms. Von Cook-Liebert.
Yes.
Mr. Prince, I believe, is already left. Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Sotelo. Ms. Sotelo, I can't hear you. I do not hear Ms. Sotelo. Mr. White.
Yes.
Resolution 21-02 is approved.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Melissa,
Okay.
is Delilah still on the call?
It does not appear to me on my screen, but earlier I could not see her as well, but I could hear her.
Yeah, I think she called in, which is why I was asking. Okay.
Yeah, she's not on here right now.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Mark.
Okay.
Item 10.
Okay, Gateway Family Apartments. I have Ruth Bikili, the multifamily loan officer, Sheena Ko, our credit officer, and Serena Ip, who is the project manager for Mid-Penn Housing Corp on behalf of the developer. Next slide, please. Gateway Apartments was originally a 130-unit project built in 1965. It was acquired by Mid-Penn in 1987, and a Section 8 contract for 100% of the units was executed. In 2015, CalHFA approved splitting the two sites into two parcels and two projects. And the phase 1 project was redeveloped, named Bell Haven, and that was redeveloped in between 2015 and now. Bell Haven consisted of the demolition of an existing 48-unit project and the new construction of a 90-unit senior project with net 42 new units. This was completed in 2017. This request relates to the redevelopment of the second half of the original site, which will be known as Gateway Apartments. The site is 3.7 acres and fronts Willow Road, located in the city of Menlo Park, San Mateo County. It's zoned for high-density residential and is part of the city's redevelopment plan for Menlo Gateway area. This is in a moderate resource area. Next slide, please. Gateway Family Apartments is phase 2 of the redevelopment. As I've said, it consists of demolishing an existing 82-unit project and new construction of a 140-unit family project, which will provide net new units of 52. The new development will serve tenants at income levels between 30 and 80% AMI. The project affordability will include 36 units at 30, 52 at 50, 6 at 55, 2 units at 60% AMI, and 43 units at 80% AMI. There's 1 restricted manager's unit. MidPenn Housing Corp, or MidPenn, is the developer and has developed over 100 affordable multifamily projects, 24 of which are currently in the CalHFA portfolio. MidPenn currently has 7 projects under construction and 31 projects in various stages of development. MidPenn focuses on building high-quality projects serving families, seniors, and special needs tenants. Gateway will also be managed by MidPenn Property Management Company. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The new construction project will be a single elevator service building of 2 to 4 stories. Of 2 to 4 stories, totaling approximately 161,000 square feet. In addition to 140 residential units, the project will have space for offices, a teen center, after-school learning center, computer lab, fitness room, and large community room. Next slide, please. CalHFA is proposing to provide a 30-year, $47.615 million permanent first lien loan with an amortization period of 40 years. The estimated interest rate is 3.87%, and a $3.5 million subsidy loan with a 55-year term and an interest rate of 3% is also being approved today. The subsidy loan is due and payable upon the earlier refinance or prepayment of the CalHFA first lien loan. The City of Menlo Park will provide a loan of $12.7 million during construction, which will be paid down to $6.4 at permanent loan closing through tax credit equity. The County of San Mateo will provide a loan of, I'm so sorry. Both loans will be for a term of 55 years at 1.79% and will subordinate to the CalHFA permanent and subsidy loans. Bank of America is the tax credit investor, and the developer fee will be $12.8 million. I wanted to break that down for you because we've had questions on large developer fees before. Cash out to the developer of this total fee will only be $2.6 million. $5.8 million of the fee will be deferred to the end of the project, and $4.3 will be an equity contribution by the developer. Next slide, please. I'd like to highlight some of the project strengths on section 7 of the staff report, which include tax credit equity generated by the project will fund up to 43% of total development costs. The price per credit for the federal credits is expected to be 98 cents on the dollar. The city and county are providing substantial permanent funding in an aggregate amount of $12.8 million and rental subsidies for 81 units. There's strong demand for affordable housing in the area, as evidenced by the appraisal, which came up with an average capture rate of only 2.4%. The project's expected to reach full lease up within 3 months of completion. The rents are 27 to 66% below market rents, which is outstanding. And the CalHFA perm first lien has a loan to value of 81%. Based on the exit analysis, which assumes a 2% increase in the cap rate and 3% increase in the underwriting interest rate, the project will be able to fully repay CalHFA's loan and subsidy loan at maturity in 30 years. Next slide, please. Now I wanted to walk you through the underwriting exception identified for the Gateway Family Apartments deal and why approval of same was recommended to the Senior Loan Committee by the Multifamily Lending and Credit Team. The exception is listed on page 6 of the staff report, and it is summarized in the slide here. The Earned Surplus Subsidy Program requires that rents are restricted to 30 to 70% of AMI. The project's rents average 30% to 50% in order to provide flexibility for existing tenants to income qualify upon returning to the project and to broaden the base of tenants from San Mateo County who can qualify. And I think in the event that the household incomes increase slightly during the construction temporary relocation period, which we estimate to be 24 months, this will help the tenants requalify and to get back into their units. Structuring the rents as such maintains a conservative approach in underwriting and also mitigates the potential risk of permanent relocation and displacement of existing households. And with that, I think that we will take any questions. I'd like to invite Serena Ip to make, if you have any very brief comments, we'd like to invite you to make those now.
Thank you, Kate. This is Serena Ip with Mid-Penn Housing, the project manager for Gateway Family. And I'd like to thank the board for their time and consideration today, and thank Kate, Ruth, and the team for all your hard work. We're an existing property in the CalHFA portfolio, so I know that this work has extended beyond the typical funding cycle that was discussed earlier of 3 to 4 years. Really started, nearly 10 years ago with the city applying an affordable housing overlay and increasing the density on the site, which allowed us to start talking to the existing lenders about the opportunity to fully replace the aged units on the site, as well as build a net of 100 new units between the 2 phases that Kate had described. And as Kate had mentioned, this project is located, in Menlo Park, which is a high-cost area. This is actually right across the street from Facebook, and there's going to be huge development in the neighborhood. And it's important for us to address equity and to continue to provide affordable housing in this community for essential workers. We have a lot of support from the localities here, the gap financing provided by both the city and the county. And we also have just over 200 residents remaining on site, eager to see through this redevelopment. And thank you again for your partnership on this project.
Thanks, Serena. And with that, I'll leave it to, that ends our presentation.
Kate, I have a question.
Yes.
This is Eileen Gallagher. I was confused by the what you called out as the exception. It looked like it was proposing tighter income targeting than but then it was described as adding flexibility for income qualifying when the project's done, and you lost me on that.
Yeah, I confused my words there. I'm going to ask Serena, do you want to address that? Either.
Sure, and maybe I can make an attempt. The project is proposing targeting at lower levels than we're restricting at. So I think the slide was trying to show that the rents we're targeting are 30 to 55% of the AMI, but the units are shown about 43 of them are restricted at 80%.
So is the higher restriction what gives you flexibility? How to interpret that? Even though you're targeting lower, I just wanted to understand how that was adding flexibility.
Oh, and I think if I'm understanding the question, I think Kate mentioned the flexibility of there's existing residents on site, and the AMI right now on the existing site is 50% and below. But during the construction period, in case household incomes, rise a little bit, we want to make sure that we were underwriting and allowing the opportunity for those residents to come back.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess this is Tina Johnson Hall. So is it an exception?
Well, it is an exception as the policy on that these subsidy funds are written, yes. Because the subsidy, it says they have to be restricted 30% have to be restricted at 70. And we're saying that their target market is really 30 to 55. We have the flexibility to go up to 70, but it could be an exception.
Okay.
But it's a positive exception.
It's a positive exception.
Okay, that's what I thought you were saying, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied at the end of.
It's okay. We're in 2.5, 3 hours, Kate. Any other questions from board members? Mr. Russell?
So I'm very verbose today. I have to say this project is one that it really brings to light all the cost issues that we are confronting here. So I am not one to put the brakes on something at this late stage, but I want to look forward to other projects and suggest for one thing, does this project maximize the density on the site? Again, I'm not going to apply it retrospectively. I'd like to look forward and maybe be asking folks as they're coming forward with proposals, is this really the most we can do? If we're getting a net gain of 58 units, understanding we're getting new, fully, modern, up to code, higher quality units, but it's a net gain of 58, and it's a substantial price for a gain of 58 units. I recognize I'm looking through the cost factors. I understand each and every one of them, and the market. I get the market. So it gives me a little bit of heartburn when we see something touching at $1 million a unit, and I fully expect that's going to be a lead in some articles. That's challenging for us, and we can't. These are circumstances that are not under their control, and I don't want to sit here and, this is the cost of doing development. The location is the right location. The community is the right community. But wow, this really brings to mind the issues we're facing, and I would be interested in knowing more with the local fees, because there are impact fees mentioned. And I guess my question is whether the municipality, which also has a lot of money in the deal, which is a mitigating factor, right? But what kinds of impact fees are they are being laid on this particular project? I've seen impact fees being abused in other municipalities.
This is Serena. I can answer that.
Yeah, Serena, that would be great.
The city has waived some of their impact fees. The other impact fees that apply for this project are through the West Bay Sanitary District, so sewer, wastewater fees, the fire district, school impact fees as well.
Yeah, essential. Which goes back to the need for us to have an infrastructure bank of some kind that can help write down these costs. Okay, well, those are my questions and concerns. I just would want staff to look forward as other projects come in, really be pushing folks to, are we maximizing the site? And it may be the case here. I know San Diego's done some extraordinary work in terms of zoning to give FAR and density bonuses that are well above what the states require. I think we need to be looking at advocacy around doing that on a broader basis. So again, with some reluctance just because of the cost. I don't want to put a damper on something that is many years in the making, but it does raise issues that we should be concerned with and should inform our future policy development.
It's called building in California, Steve. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Okay. Any other questions from board members? Is there a motion?
This is Jonathan. I'll move approval.
I second Dr. Imbassiani.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Dr. Melissa, roll call.
Ms. Avila Frias? I'm not hearing Ms. Avila Frias. Ms. Gallagher?
Yes.
Dr. Imbassiani?
Yes.
Mr. Gunning?
Yes.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Starr?
Yes.
Mr. Seeley?
Yes.
Ms. Von Koch-Liebert?
Yes.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Sotelo? Still not hearing Ms. Sotelo. Mr. White?
Yes.
Resolution 21-03.
Unmute. Melissa,
you.
this is Anna Marie. This is a yes.
Thank you, Ms. Anna Marie, Ms. Avila Frias, excuse me. Resolution 21-03 is approved.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, board members. All right, Don, we have a series of resolutions coming up here.
Yes, I think Tim Sue has got a brief presentation to go through the resolutions and see if the board has any questions.
Okay. Tim?
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Item 11.
Okay, good. So as I heard the word brief, and I get it. Taken as a group, these 5 agenda items, 11 to 15, these are 5 resolutions. They are the annual resolutions that staff brings to the board for consideration and authorization. And together they provide the authority to finance our business plan, which we bring to the board in May. These are a little bit forward-looking in the sense that we do create these in conjunction with the May business plan, but they are on a slightly different cycle, just so that we don't have so much going on in the May board meeting. So these are from March of this year until March of next year in terms of the authority. The first resolution for the board's consideration is Resolution 2104. This is the multifamily bond resolution. I will say that in 2020, or from the last time when the board passed this resolution until now, we did not issue any multifamily bonds using CalHFA's own credit. And as discussed earlier, we have issued a lot of multifamily conduit bonds in that span of time, but not any bonds that were issued with our own credit. I'm going to highlight a couple of things just so that the board gets a flavor of where some of the activities are. We do have a provision of asking for authority to do $2.5 billion of conduit bonds that do not require volume cap allocation. Earlier, Don mentioned in the overview that we're working on a deal with Citi, what we call a Citi securitization of their balance sheet loans of $522 million. That deal actually closed earlier today, this morning. So this $2.5 billion allocation sort of authority is to accommodate transactions like that. They are gearing up to do a couple of more of these in the next 6 months or so. The one thing that we did on these resolutions across all 5 of them is to clarify there's a section on the credit facilities that we can acquire. Last year, we actually didn't have a limit on the amount of credit facilities, and we think that it's better for us to have a limit. So for the credit facility language across the 5 resolutions is more unified and more consistent now. So the credit facility not to exceed $700 million. Right now, we actually have 2 credit facilities out there, one with the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco and one with Brayburn Capital. The amount, the capacity for the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco credit facility is $200 million, and right now we're not using any of that. And with Brayburn Capital, the availability is $250 million. And as of this morning, we have drawn down to $26 million of that credit facility. I will pause to see if there are any questions. And again, this is the multifamily bond resolution. And the way that these resolutions are created, there's a multifamily bond, multifamily non-bond, single-family bond, and single-family non-bond. And perhaps as a reminder, the reason why we did that about 4 years ago is that we migrated much of our business to using non-bond financing techniques. We thought that for the sake of transparency, it's better for us to do resolutions for each program separately, one related to the issuance of bonds and one related to not issuance of bonds, but using non-bond techniques. So again, this is the multifamily bond resolution, and I'll pause for questions.
Yeah, this is Tina Johnson Hall. Do they charge us a non-use fee for the facility that we are not currently using?
That would be a bank facility, and these facilities do not have that.
Good.
This is Eileen. I'm curious about the 2 credit facilities, the Home Loan Bank and the Brayburn, and do they have different purposes, different rates? Sort of just curious about the why we have both.
Yes, we definitely. Going back to Tina's point, you're right, Tina, that if we were charged an unused commitment fee, if you will, unused commitment fee, we would definitely try to size these down. And to Eileen's question, these are definitely different purposes. The Federal Home Bank of San Francisco warehouse line, or this is a credit facility, it was meant to at some point warehouse our mortgage-backed securities, and we don't do that anymore. And Brayburn Capital, this is a subsidiary of Apple. This is the facility that we use to do the multifamily bond recycle, volume cap recycling.
Thank you. That Brayburn should have been the good giveaway, I guess.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Tim, this is Mike. Just to follow up on that. So is that related to Apple and the effort we have with Apple? Is that why Brayburn's involved? Okay, I see Don nodding his head. That answered it. Okay. That's it. Any other questions from board members? Do we have to do these individually, Melissa, or can we do one motion?
I think maybe ask the board what their thought is on it.
How about we ask the lawyer what her thought is on it?
I play a lawyer sometimes, but I think my advice is to do this individually and
That's
separate.
what I was thinking, Tim. Claire, you have a different thought?
Prefer individually, Chair Gunning, but in the name of expediency, if the board members are all in agreement about all resolutions, you can certainly take them up all at the same time. No prohibition on doing that.
Any disagreement with approving them all at once?
This is Eileen. One question for me. It's more of a conflict of interest issue since my firm is an underwriter. I think we're clean on since the board isn't approving the underwriter, I think we're clean on all of this, but I know I've had a conversation before with agency counsel on that. I just want to make sure there's not a conflict, one or the other.
Can the record reflect she abstained on that vote? Is it the third one, Eileen?
Yeah, that's probably cleanest.
That's what I thought too, yeah.
That's preferable, sir. Thank you.
Okay, good. We still need a motion though.
Dr. Bassiani, I move acceptance.
Awesome, thank you, Doctor. And a second?
This is Jonathan. I'll second that motion.
Thank you, sir. All right, Melissa, roll call.
Ms. Avila Farias? I'm not hearing you, Ms. Avila Farias. Ms. Gallagher? How are we doing this? Are we?
I'd say yes, with the exception of 3.
If that's what your vote is?
Yes.
Yeah, I need to make sure I'm clear on that. Can you skip over me?
Melissa, can you hear me? This is Anna Marie.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay,
Right.
Ms. Gallagher, we'll skip you and we'll come back to you at the end.
Thank you.
Ms. Avila Farias, your vote?
Yes. Can you hear me? Because
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Imbassiani?
Yes, votes yes.
Mr. Gunning?
Yes.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Starr?
Yes.
Mr. Seeley?
Yes.
Ms. Von Koch-Liebert?
Yes.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Sotelo? Not hearing Ms. Sotelo. Mr. White?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Gallagher? I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm going to abstain from the multifamily because I think that's where our firm probably has some activities. And then I think the single family ones are the non-bond ones are.
So, and just so I have that correct, I have that in resolution 21-04. And was there, let's see, and 21-05?
21-05 is fine, it's non-bond. So just 21-04 abstain.
Okay, all right.
That's right.
Correct. All right. With that, resolutions 21-06 21-04, 21-05, 21-06, and 21-07 and 21-08 have passed for approval. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. Hey, it seems like I forgot the minutes from the last meeting. Did anyone have any comments or edits to those? That's from our January 21st meeting. Good. If not, then let's deem those approved and accepted. Item number 16, of course, draw your attention to the regular reports. Are there any other board matters that members want to bring up today?
This is Jonathan. I just want to observe as a longtime member of the board that given the time of year with spring training and March Madness, to not hear a single sports reference from Tim all morning was shocking.
You don't know how much work behind the scenes that took, Jonathan.
Well, you didn't hear the rest of my presentation. You all voted. So good.
Oh, good.
But having said that, Jonathan, I feel like sports is just not the same anymore.
It will be. It will be. Come on. This is the opportunity for public comment. I know I've gotten a few texts in the middle of the meeting, but any members of the public out there wish to comment, the time is now.
Nobody has their hand raised.
So I was going to say, if any members of the public would like to speak, if you'll raise your hand so we can identify you. And then
Mark is saying no.
we're not seeing any, nope.
Okay. When is the next meeting?
Currently it's in May. And there is a possibility that there may be the need to have a meeting in April. So as soon as if we identify that that's a need, we will notify you as soon as possible. So you can get that on your calendar, or the date should be on your calendar, but that way you'll know to plan for that.
Sure. All right. I think that brings us to a conclusion. Last chance. Any other comments? Great. If not, good to see everyone. Welcome, Fred. Good to be on board.
Thank you.
Don, we'll talk to you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.